Okay. May I have a mover and a seconder to reconvene the meeting, please? Deputy Mayor Coughlin, Councillor Chapman. That the council hereby reconvene at 3 p.m. on January 30, 2019. And again, I ask, does anybody have a pecuniary interest to declare? Okay, thank you. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? Carried. We need to just clean up a matter, a motion about receiving the draft operating budget from the last meeting. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Moore and Councillor Chapman. That the 2019 draft operating budgets, tax, water, and wastewater rate-based operating budgets be received. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, welcome. We're on our second day of reviewing new initiatives and programs. Thank you, Council, for all being here and for the questions that you submitted, and it got good discussion going. So, Director Schmidt, turn it over to you to lead the way.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of Council. Good afternoon. Before we get into today's session, just wanted to have a quick reflection on where we are and where we've come. So essentially, our last meeting, which was on January 16th, we discussed, or we had our service partners attend and provide updates on their request for 2019, as well as the township provided an overview of our tax-based water and wastewater operating budgets. In addition, we took some time to walk through each of the tabs, or majority of the tabs that are in your budget binder, to go over each of the sections and to address any questions that you may have had at that time. With that said, we have gotten a few other questions from members of council since then, and we do appreciate those questions, and hopefully we've provided you with the responses, or some responses that clarify things for you. If not, again, we are open to any questions that you may have at any time throughout the budget, this meetings and or until the budget's approved. So for today, the intent was to go through or focus on the new initiatives or program changes. And so this slide here essentially summarizes those program changes. The intent is to have each department head or director go through the program changes in the order that they are here, provide an overview of those program changes, and to address any questions that members of council may have. Subject to that, then there are recommendations on the agenda that staff would be looking for council to consider today as it relates to each of these program changes. So with that, I guess I'll just give a high-level overview here. So again, there's 8 program changes that are being proposed for 2019, of which 7 of them are township initiated, if you will, one being from the SSEA, or the Severn Sound Environmental Association. All 8 program changes overall would account to a net impact of $520,000, or a 4.3% increase. This would be in addition to the 0.99 that we spoke about at the last meeting. And this slide here, I'll just flip to the next slide and then I'll flip back here. But this next slide here essentially gives everyone information on what the impact on an average residential property would be should council consider all program changes. Again, this is if all program changes were approved, as well as the base operating budget that came in at 0.99%. So for the township side, it'd be a 5.3% increase, or just over $81. For the county, which they did approve their budget last week, I believe it was, at 2%, it would equate to approximately just under $26. So if we add in the policing charge, and again, the policing charge is not if you own managed forest property and or farmland, you wouldn't be paying the $240, it would be less than that. But essentially, assuming a residential property, it'd be a $12 increase. So overall, you'd be looking at $118, or a 3.11% blended tax increase. Again, assuming an average home assessed at $451,000 and change.
Director Schmidt, just to compare to 2018, the top and bottom numbers for 2018 were what?
I don't have that at my fingertips, Mr. Mayor, but I will grab that for you before the end of today's session. So with that said, I'll just circle back to this slide here, and we'll start to maybe go through each one of these program changes. And again, I'll have the department head or the director just highlight the program change and address any questions that council may have. So with the mechanic is being proposed by our Director of Public Works. So I'll hand things over to our Director of Public Works to kind of give an overview.
Thank you, Director Schmidt, and through you and the Mayor to the members of Council, we are recommending a mechanic for 2019 and moving forward. This is an additional position in addition to a mechanic that we already have. This person would report to Yard 1, where we currently have an additional hoist, so there wouldn't be any costs associated with outfitting that location. The mechanic would be hired to work mainly on our light-duty vehicles, our small engine, so that like sidewalk tractors, that sort of thing. Currently, this stuff is outsourced out, and you can see in the program change form, we've outlined where the various pieces of equipment and light-duty vehicles go and how much we spend outsourcing that work out per year. Those costs were strictly labor costs. They're not materials costs, so that would still remain the same. The mechanic will be hired to perform, like I said, light-duty stuff. However, they would have the additional trade license, the heavy truck and coach, so they can assist with repairs that our current mechanic does where we need 2 people, or he or she can fill in on an as-needed basis when the current mechanic is on vacation. The person would also be required to have a DZ license. That's number 1 for moving equipment around the yard, as well as filling in snow plowing as needed. And I think with that, it covers my requirements for the position, and I'm open to any questions.
Okay, the council? Questions? Councillor Cabral.
Through Mayor to Director. This particular item here, unfortunately, I haven't been around, but has this come up before, Director Coleman?
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you to Councillor Cabral. There was a study, I believe that was in 2009, that recommended an additional mechanic at that time. Since then, the fleet has certainly grown to the point where a lot is outsourced out, and we feel this is a good time to act on that position.
Thank you. Just the other comment, I did get some numbers in relationship to 2009 all the way up through till now, regarding an increased number of both heavy dumps, tandem and single axle, as well as an additional sidewalk machine and acquiring another one again. Also the 1-ton pickup trucks that are also being used. So the fleet's actually grown considerably from 2009 to now, and there still is only the 1 mechanic. And my understanding is the mechanic that's being requested would have the same certifications as Pierre does now.
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Councillor Cabral. He would have the same license in terms of the heavy duty and the truck and coach, but he would also have his automotive services technician, so he would be licensed to work on light duty vehicles, which our current mechanic he's not licensed to work on the light duty stuff.
Okay, thank you.
The questions, Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor. I probably won't get any support for this, but just an observation for me would be that anytime we're hiring people like a mechanic, if they would also be firefighter, able to respond to fire service, to help our fire service, the volunteers, whatever you want to call them, I think it would be advantageous because they're around in the daytime. But my question is, that's just an observation. My question is, the mechanic will be doing work that normally got sent out. So wouldn't it be basically a wash for what we're going to be paying in salaries versus what we're been paying in the past for sending out repairs?
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through you to Councillor Hanna. If you look at the front page of your program change form, I think that the net impact to the tax is about $971. So we've estimated that our labor costs to send equipment to a third party is about $67,000. And then the cost of us hiring this person would be about $60,971. So close to a wash, yes.
Would you see that number, that spread increasing over future years?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I would suggest that it probably would remain the same or go lower, because I would suspect that the outsourcing rate would increase at the same rate that our mechanics rate would. Certainly the shop rate goes, I would say, goes up every year as well.
Councillor Moore?
Sorry, through you, Mayor Allen, to Director Coleman. With the mechanic that we have now, are we paying overtime, and if so, how much? Would he be billing for that? My second question is, no, please answer that first. I was just going to make a statement more than a question, in that the $60,000 or $67,000 in wages, does that include benefits and pension allocation and all of that on top? Because that adds a considerable amount on top. Thank you.
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Councillor Moore. The current mechanic does get paid some overtime. I don't have those numbers in front of me. I could certainly find out and get back to you. There are on occasions where he's working on something that he may stay. He's also DZ licensed, so he may come in to plow or something like that in addition to our other staff. There may be occasions where on a Saturday a snowplow goes down and he gets called in, but I don't have those numbers. I wouldn't say that it's every day, but I'll certainly, we can find out and let you know. The $67,971 is salaries and benefits.
Councillor Cabral?
Through Mayor Allen to Director Coleman. I'm just curious to know, when a vehicle now is being taken for service, there's obviously someone has to do some pickup and drop off. Would there be times when our mechanic would be the individual that be responsible for doing that?
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Councillor Cabral. There would be, I would say the majority of the time when a vehicle is dropped off and not towed in, it would be the mechanic that drops it off and then somebody would pick them up. When it's ready, it's kind of whoever's available to go get it, but again, it may be the mechanic as well that picks it up.
And that would actually entail, in some cases, two individuals going to drop that vehicle off so that someone can get a ride back. The same thing would happen when the vehicle was being ready to be picked up. Would that be fairly correct?
Yes, that it would more than likely be two people every time, unless the vehicle is towed in.
All right, and my other question is in regards to the second mechanic coming on now. Is that in preparation for, on the capital project's 10-year plan? I noted in there that there was a possibility of putting in a second bay at Yard 1 or wherever our Public Works building is at that time.
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Councillor Cabral. As it sits right now, we do have a hoist available for this person. That additional hoist would be a heavy-duty hoist, so that may be, at that point, we'd have to reevaluate whether we were looking for a third mechanic or whether we were looking for that person to move over.
Thank you.
CAO Brindley?
Mr. Mayor, if I could add, one of the challenges I don't think our director has mentioned is if we have a piece of equipment on one heavy hoist and it is in a condition where, example, another vehicle needs attention right away, we essentially have to reassemble that vehicle, pull it down off the heavy hoist, and then bring in another heavy duty. So this flexibility in the future would also enable not necessarily having another mechanic, but having the ability to have two heavy-duty vehicles under work at the same time. As I mentioned, now if something happens, we actually have to pull the heavy-duty vehicle off the one hoist and bring another one back in. And that's rather time-consuming, especially if it's something you just need to do an hour's worth of work on a vehicle, example, that might be out plowing in the winter and just needs something quickly. Right now, in order to get on the hoist, we have to bring down whatever's on the hoist. So it helps with redundancies and making things smoother.
Thank you. Councillor Cabral?
I think from here, through Mayor Allen, it's just a comment, really. I'm just kind of picturing here that I think when we take our heavy equipment over to Curry's, which I believe that's generally where it would go for repairs, they would then be prioritizing when our equipment would be getting repaired, rather than if we were doing it in-house. Repairs to equipment would be prioritized based on Springwater Township's operational needs. Would that be correct?
Director Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through you to Councillor Cabral. That would be correct, and not to discourage, but we do get treated well there. But you're absolutely right. If we have two pieces of equipment that require work, then we would be able to prioritize which gets done first.
Okay. Okay, so we're moving on to the next program item, and then we'll be doing the motions at the end of all of the program reviews. Okay? Thank you, Director Schmidt.
So the next, Mr. Mayor, the next program change that to be addressed is the Asset Management Coordinator position, which again, Director of Public Works will provide an overview.
Thank you. So the Asset Management Coordinator has come about by changes in legislation that and regulations that we've experienced over the last couple of years. The requirements for an asset management plan, and for us to be aware of what assets we have and where they are and their value. We've certainly in-house been trying to capture those assets and be prepared for this, but we've come to the point where we would definitely need somebody with the expertise in asset management and in software that we are looking to purchase as well. So this person would be working out of this office, would initially be looking at roads, bridges, and that the main infrastructure that requires meeting the regulation first. That person would then move out to work on parks and other assets that require, I guess, meeting the regulation by the final deadlines. I would envision this person, certainly when they start, hopefully this year, they would be collecting our assets. They would become involved in evaluating our assets and getting us moving forward to having an asset management program that we can in turn use to justify our budgets, to create our capital projects, and that sort of thing. So with that, I will answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Cabral?
Through Mayor Allen to Director Coleman. I did do a bit of research into this, and I found that there were a number of municipalities, some obviously larger than ours, that were actively seeking asset manager coordinator positions. So it seems to be a pretty hot thing with the legislation coming down. I'm just curious to know whether or not any thought has been given. Initially, I can imagine that it would be very time-consuming, but once everything was on stream, the amount of work might be reduced to some point, whether or not there was any consideration given to either a non-full-time position for this, or if it were a full-time position, would there be other duties assigned to that position when everything was kind of in place? Because obviously front-end loading everything is going to be pretty intensive, but once everything is in place, is the municipality that we have large enough to warrant full-time position after that?
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through you to Councillor Cabral. I would certainly envision that once we are caught up, this would still be a full-time position. This person would be responsible for collecting all the information on new assets. So as we assume development, as we reconstruct roads, as we, for example, build new buildings, this person would be responsible to make sure that all that is accounted for and in the software. In addition, this person would be helping us prepare budgets. I would envision that they would be actively involved in maintaining and evaluating the condition of our current assets. Certainly, there's things that we're doing now. We do CCTV on our sewers That person would be evaluating the CCTV, updating the software appropriately. And as it moves forward, typically a work order management system becomes involved with the asset management system, so that person would be updating that, would be monitoring activities, and that would be working with staff and training them. There is definitely more than enough work for a full-time person.
Councillor Moore?
Through you, Mayor Allen, and to Director Coleman. So who does it all now? Because it sounds like a fairly big job, and certainly somebody must be managing your assets and monitoring their life, like the life expectancies. Thank you.
Director Coleman?
Mayor Allen, through you to Councillor Moore, some of it's getting done now, not all of it's getting done now. What I have done in Public Works is I've had a road needs study completed, so that was done by a consultant. We have our structural inspections completed by a consultant. They do need to be done under a professional engineer stamp, so that may stay out, consulted out. In addition to that, we've had a consultant on staff and Director Schmidt can update that, for probably more than a year, helping us out, pointing us in the right direction, telling us what to get together and leading us in that. So certainly, I could suggest that maybe 25% of what I've said this person will be doing is getting done by us, but the rest is waiting.
Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and just subsequent to Director Coleman's comments. So asset management, for those that may not be aware, New Zealand and Australia have been doing asset management for 20 plus years and still haven't perfected it. And they're supposed to be the leaders in asset management. So based on that, I think, this individual is going to be kept busy now and in the future. As Director Coleman mentioned, there's lots of maintenance that has to happen, but additionally, there's GIS work that'll have to happen to make sure that all of this stuff is in our GIS and we can actually visually see the assets that are being constructed or maintained. When we do our capital projects or our capital budget discussion with council, hopefully we're going to be in a position where through the software we can actually visually see the projects that are being done. Also, the software allows for prioritization, so if we're suggesting we did $1 million or $1.5 million, or that's what council is willing to give, then we can do sensitivity analysis through the software as well to provide how best to spend those dollars. So it is something that it is heavily legislated by the province. Back in 2008-9, the first step in the process was to inventory all of your assets, because municipalities in Ontario and Canada were never required to do that. So that is more of a private sector mentality and not necessarily a bad thing. You should know what assets you have and what condition they're in and when they're likely to be replaced. And so that's really the basis of asset management. And there's also discussion that has to happen in 2023 or 2024 about levels of service and how each of these assets actually contribute to the levels of service that are being provided to our residents today. And there has to be a discussion about, can we continue to provide those levels of service with those assets? So there is a lot of work, and to have consultants come in, and we were lucky enough last year to get funding, about $50,000 to assist us, and through that we were provided with additional training. We developed a strategic asset management policy, which was actually is due by July of this year, but we're ahead of the schedule, thank God. There is funding out there. Consultants are great, but what we found is that typically with that is sometimes things get shelved if somebody's not here putting their finger on the pulse at all times. And we do have a steering committee here of myself and the Director of Public Works and the Director of Recreation, Parks and Properties, as well as Planning and our CAO. But really, we're just touching stuff. We're not able to get into the meat and potatoes of things, if you will, just due to other priorities. So my recommendation is that this is something that definitely I can see as being full-time from here into the future. So,
CAO Brindley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to add that up until recently, the province only required sort of to look at asset management probably at what I would consider the 50,000 foot level, very high level. The challenge right now is we've been given a number of dates to achieve certain achievables. First of all, the asset management policy, which we are ahead of on that, but the next 2 cycles is detailed information that's required to be done, detailed analysis, which is going to take a significant amount of time. And if it isn't hiring a person, we definitely need to align money to hire more consultants to do the job. And that's the challenge is now we're being required by the province to do detailed work that looks at every single asset we have. And you have to look, example, if a new subdivision, there are thousands of assets. Every single piece of pipe we have to article. Everything has to now be essentially archived and documented and looking at life cycle management for these assets. And that's the challenge now is not only do we have to do this work at a high detail level, future funding from the province will be contingent on us having this work done. So if we don't hire the right people to get this work done, the province could come back to us saying, well, you didn't get your asset plan done. We're not going to give you this money, or we're not going to be qualifying for future rounds of infrastructure funding because we have no way to prove to the province that we need it. And that's the thing is there's a lot of interconnectivity that will happen in the future in terms of us finishing the detailed work and then in the future us potentially getting government funding for work.
Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you to Director Coleman. It indicates that the asset management coordinator is being hired. This is a 9-month caption of the salary. Is it an indication of what it will be for a full year?
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. I think that might be better for.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. So an annualized cost essentially is just under $70,000.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, it's indicating that it's coming the entire budget out of Public Works, and understanding that there's evaluation of multiple different departments. Is it a cost share between that and Parks and Rec, or is it all Public Works?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. So a portion is being funded at a tax, which would be Public Works, Rec, whatever.
Water
They're all
and
funded out of tax, but there is about 24,000. So the revenue cost or cost savings portion that's in there of 24,000 and change is actually coming from water and wastewater. So there will be an additional portion coming from water and wastewater in the future as well.
And thank you for that. The question, though, understanding that there are some positions within the municipality that are funded portionally from Public Works, portionally from Parks and Rec. Is this a composition, or is this all out of Public Works aside from the water and wastewater?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. So essentially, it would all be coming out of Public Works at this stage.
Yes, follow on.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Allen, to Director Coleman. Aside from the biannual, assessment that we do of the bridges and culverts, is there any other work that we will still be going out to, whether we need a PNG or not? Is that the only one, or is there additional work every year that we will still need to hire consultants for?
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head right now. Certainly, the road needs study could move in-house. I guess if there was something identified in a road needs study that needed a professional engineer, that might have to go outside, but that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mary Allen. Through you to Deputy Coleman once again. I guess looking for clarification on software. I know that the RPM software is something that the township struggled with for some time, having used it myself. I'm just curious to know, I did see in here software in some of the budget items, and some of it is a fairly big ticket item to purchase and then ongoing licensing. Asset management and the function of the road patroller and the creation and flow of work orders. Would the one piece of software be able to incorporate both of those functions, or would we then again be looking at two separate purchases of software?
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Councillor Cabral. we have previewed a few pieces of software, and ideally, the piece of software we would choose would do all these functions. They would all be tied together. So your asset management software would be tied to your road patrol software, which is tied to your work orders management system. So if a patroller were out and identified, let's say, a pothole, he or she would create a work order. The work order would get repaired, but at the same time, the asset management software is tracking this. So that, say for example, all of a sudden your maintenance costs are through the roof on this section of road, it would give you the background to possibly resurface it or reconstruct it.
Thank you.
No other questions or discussion points at this time? Okay, we'll move on to snow removal, please.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through the council. This is a request for 2 additional, what we call outdoor maintenance workers. The position would involve working for Parks and Recreation, primarily March till November, during the warm and non-snow months. And then in the winter months, it would assume the plowing duties of all the small pump houses, township facilities, et cetera, that are currently being done by our building maintenance assistant and the road patrollers. But we have found, excuse me, we have found that just plowing the snow with the building maintenance of person and the road patrollers is not sustainable, given the additional facilities that we've amassed since we started this. We've gone from 34 to 58 facilities since 2009 when we first started doing our own plowing. In conjunction with that is the additional duties that are required by the road patroller under the minimum maintenance standards now. So we did issue an RFP or a request for proposal for plowing of these 58 locations, and it came in at just over $127,000. Initially, from the Recreation Parks and Properties Department, we were looking at 2 additional contract workers just for the 8 months of the year, which would have, excuse me, run us around $80,000 to have those 2 positions to assist with our main challenges are overlap in the spring season and trying to get parks, properties, playing fields ready for the season while the arena is still operating, and then opening the arena again in mid-August to late August while our outdoor playing fields are still at full steam. Essentially bringing a staff down to 3 people trying to maintain these structures. Coupled with that is the change in the regulations regarding public pools, whereby they added, excuse me, a Class C facility last year, which includes splash pads, which we just opened last year, and the requirements around it for water testing have gone from once a day to every 4 hours during operation. So, and what we've learned over the last number of years is we have to, we can't sustain our operations with the staff that we have. We do need to, we can't be Monday to Friday, 7:30 to 4 anymore. We have to run 7 days a week because of the increased use of our facilities, having more facilities out there, and and higher expectations from our people and our users. So after we did the analysis of the snow plowing contract, we looked back at whether or not we should look at adding 2 more outdoor maintenance workers, which would be similar to the staff that we have now that, that do our sidewalk snow removal in the winter and our parks maintenance during the summer months. And by comparison, for this year, we'd be looking at a tax impact of just under $86,000, compared to the $127 just for plowing snow. So that's where we're, excuse me, that's where we're at, why we're proposing 2 additional outdoor maintenance workers. the 56,000 in revenues would be the cost, the chargebacks to the water and wastewater systems, which that would be incurred whether we contracted out the snow removal or if we do it in-house.
Thank you, Director Belcourt. Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Director Belcourt, or it could be Director Coleman, whichever. I can understand the rationale. It sounds like what we're doing is getting a couple of snowplow guys in relationship to having the additional staff for the summer. Would that be fair to say? The requirement sounds to me like it's really for the summer in order to facilitate the shift in the weekends.
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through to Councillor Corbell, you're, excuse me, you're correct. The main impetus of this was to facilitate the summer operations. But when we looked at the two items separately, it made sense to bring on the staff full-time and have them assume the plowing duties we were looking at tendering out. Not only do we get use of these two individuals full-time over the course of the winter months too, versus a sidewalk or a snow plowing contract where we would only have their services for plowing snow, no other things. If it doesn't snow, they'd be sitting at home collecting the contract fee. Whereas if our staff are doing it, and we have so far behind on our tree pruning and tree maintenance programs, before we had snow this year, both Public Works and our staff were both out doing numerous projects that we just can't get to through the busy summer months. So that's why we're recommending that we have two full-time people versus an 8-month contract and then tendering out the snow plowing.
Follow on?
Actually, to follow up on that, I guess what I'm trying to envision in my mind is as far as when we do have the what I would have to call severe winter events where the whole township gets blanketed and we have to plow the 58 different sites. I know that can obviously be time consuming and certainly take the patroller away from his patrol duties. I'm just wondering how often that happens, and also wondering whether or not two individuals would necessarily be required to facilitate what we're trying to achieve in the wintertime by having those parking lots and springwater facilities plowed by springwater staff, whether the patroller's involved or not.
Director Coleman? Sorry, Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through to Councillor Corbell. It does take two individuals now, full 8 hours plus, to plow all of these facilities under a normal snow event, which they would do, whether it's as they currently do. I believe that, and Councillor or Director Coleman can answer regarding the patroller, but the patroller's duties now have changed such that they need their 8-hour shift to focus on the patrolling requirements, and that doesn't allow any time for snow removal during their shift.
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Councillor Cabral. In speaking with the patroller position, that person starts at 10 p.m. and works until 8:30 in the morning. So if it snows between those times, that's fine. They can get to those. There's quite often times where he's in my office and he's going home at 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning and he's telling me the facilities he hasn't completed because he doesn't have time and he's been here for 12 hours. So that he's not getting done, and if it snows between 8:30 in the morning and 10 p.m. at night, he's also not here to do his portion, so he'll start at 10 at night when he gets in. So I think in terms of doing the facilities, we're not doing them justice. Some of them aren't getting done in a reasonable time frame, and that's just the plowing. In addition to that, there are times where today the sun's shining on it, tomorrow morning it's gonna be frozen, so he'll have to come in and put some salt down. So it's not necessarily times where it snowed and he has to plow. There are other maintenance requirements that they'll have to pick up in addition to just plowing the
Ju-
snow.
just-
One more follow-on, and then we'll go to
Yeah,
Councillor
just to clarify then, is the expectation that the two outdoor workers would be plowing through the daytime? Because that tends not to be the normal time when plowing is done in order to remove the snow for daytime use. So I'm just curious how that would work.
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through you to Councillor Cabral. What would happen is that they would be called in probably at 3 or 4 in the morning when our roads staff are called in, and they would begin with the facilities that open first thing in the morning. So they would start, say, with this facility, with the library, with facilities where we have people showing up at 8 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning, where we have public coming and going. From there, they could continue on and they could do pump stations and lift stations where really what we have is maybe one staff checking on that site twice a day. So they wouldn't necessarily have to start as early as the patroller does to get the work done, but they would definitely be called in early to get the facilities that are required to be done.
Councillor Ritchie?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. To support these two positions, do we have the equipment now in place to fulfill these positions? Or is that another thing that we're going to have to look at, more equipment to make sure they have something to work with?
Just to add to that, if we look at the program change, there's materials and supplies, 10,000, and other 32,000. Maybe you just make that part and parcel of the answer. Director Belcourt, please.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councillor Ritchie. There would be no additional equipment purchased immediately. The two new hires would utilize the two plow trucks that we have now, and then the two people that the the building and maintenance assistant would utilize the Nissan van was for that position, and the road patroller would utilize the regular pickup truck for his position. With regards to the additional materials and supplies, we've allocated additional fuels and maintenance for the vehicles, and the 32,000 is an annual contribution for life cycle replacement of the equipment.
Follow on?
Yes, thank you. So each person is a yearly salary of 50, 60,000? What is that? Am I missing something there?
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, through to Councillor Ritchie. Now I'm only estimating. It'd be approximately about 110,000 to 115,000 with salaries and benefits.
Councillor Moore?
Through you, Mayor Allen, to Director Belcourt. Am I correct then that you are replacing the 3 facility monitors with these 2 positions? And because they're already staff, technically, even though they're casual, they're still spring
think
water
we're-
staff.
I think we're mixing up the...
Am I?
Yeah. We're on the snow removal, and the facility monitors are
Oh.
the next one after this.
Is that right?
Facility staffing.
My bad.
Stay tuned.
Thank you. Sorry.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mary Allen. Through you to Director Coleman. I'm just, I understand now how they're going to be called in, so they would normally be working, say, a day shift and get called in earlier to come in. So then they would be part of the shift premium program then?
Director Coleman?
Yes, the shift premium is for winter staff called in early on a weekday, so they would be eligible for that.
Follow on?
Yes, actually, the other thing I was curious to know is, they're gonna be working a 5-day shift, so if they need to be called in on Saturday and Sunday, or would, for small events, would the patroller or still be able to manage that, or would he automatically call them in for any snow event where parking lot required plowing on their days off as well?
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through you to Councillor Cabral. That would be up to the patroller. If it's a small event that they can look after themselves, they're certainly welcome to. They do the same now with road staff. If there's one road that's drifted, for example, they'll hop in a plow and take care of that instead of calling someone in. So I think if they felt that they could look after it, they would be more than welcome to.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, good discussion. We'll move on now to facility staffing. Thanks. Director Belcour.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through the council. Again, this program change involves two different types of positions. First, it's to address some challenges that we're having. The first being the Hillsdale crossing guard. As you know, we're no different than other communities in trying to find people to fulfill that position. It is a part-time position, as it is right now, that extends across the day at 3 different points in the day. We have been fortunate over the years to have a person who has been really dedicated to it, but she does have another job, and that job is expanding and taking more of her time, which is creating challenges because we don't have anybody formally as a backup. So we've been having to pull on our full-time staff, whether it be outside personnel or staff from within the building. I think we're using 2 or 3 different people, taking them from here and sending them to Hillsdale to do crossing guard duties. Our proposal is to create a position called a community worker. That position would facilitate the crossing guard duties, and in between that would assist with other building maintenance that's required. Like for example, this time of year they would scoot around to buildings and do any hand shoveling that's required that we now pay some casual people to do. Or they would do garbage maintenance, any general maintenance in between the times that they're required at the crossing guard site. Even though the MTO did put up the flashing light last year, we're still obligated to provide that service until such time there's a fully signalized intersection. So that's the overview on that. The second is the facility monitor's position. Those on council from the previous term will remember that that we did reorganize how our community halls are operated, whereby the township oversees all the day-to-day operations, and the community and the community volunteers operate community events. As part of that changeover, we did create what we called part-time facility monitors. We'd hope to get a pool of 6 to 7 individuals who we could schedule on an interim basis, depending on our needs. Unfortunately, we've only been able to secure 2, sometimes 3 individuals, and they're not always available when we need them. Another issue is too, there's been a reluctance from the renters to take direction from these, what they don't call full-time township employees, and why are they here bothering us? Which has created some, issues for them, understandably, for the facility monitors. And then in turn, if there's not enough work and we try to want them to do other work, they're really not compensated that well to be going and doing any major works. So we're proposing that we hire 1 full-time facility maintenance person / monitor. They would be scheduled primarily on an afternoon shift, covering weekends and events. They would also assist with managing some of our outbuildings during the summer months, such as the washroom concession building here, which was experienced fire last year during after hours because we didn't have anybody to lock it up at the end of the day. Or at Dorn Parks, where we've had similar incidents. We have Hillsdale that needs to be open and closed on a daily basis. Plus, we have ongoing issues or requirements for our renters that if there's an issue during an evening, we do have to bring somebody in. If, an example, we have a sprinkler go off, they'll call the monitoring company, and then we have to find somebody to come and address it. So this would be another role that this position would fulfill.
Start with Councillor Moore with your questions.
Through you, Mayor Allen, to Director Belcourt, just so I'm clear, this second position would still be around the 55,000 mark. I'm just splitting the number in half. I'm not sure what you're thinking to pay the crossing guard position, but that's question one. But number two, this facility person would have to have a vehicle, I think. It sounds to me like they're on call. You say afternoons, but then you said the Hillsdale needs to be open and closed and the weekends, and I'm not quite sure how that person is going to manage their time. Anyway, you can help me out. Thank you.
So just around that, I might add, so it's the logistics of both of these positions. If you've got a crossing guard that's got to be there opening before school, noon and after, and then you're saying you'd use them for other snow clearing or other facilities, they have to stay pretty much close to Hillsdale, so what would be the logistics of that? And further to what Councillor Moore says, the logistics of somebody else when part of their work is moving around to different locations.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to members of council. To answer your question, we realize that that person would have to be relatively close to Hillsdale, and any work assigned to them would be such that it would allow them to be back at those positions at that spot at the given time. We also envision that being a later start time in the day, so that they would start. They wouldn't start at 7:30. They would start like at 8 a.m. or 8:15, and then work later in the day to accommodate the before and after school times. And then anything that's scheduled, would be predominantly in the Hillsdale, Elmville, or Lake area. With regards to the facility monitor replacement, that person would be on a scheduled shift. They wouldn't be an on-call, so it would be a 5-day scheduled shift. As far as having use of a vehicle, we do have numerous vehicles that are available in the afternoons. That person, similarly to what we do now, we provide them with a vehicle at a location where they pick it up and go. I've envisioned that position starting probably out of this maintenance yard. We had that new maintenance shed that we constructed last year, and we're starting to stagger our work out of both locations in order to accommodate and best address all our maintenance issues and scheduling requirements.
All one?
So just to follow up then, I thought you said this person would be on the weekends too. So would it be a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday schedule then? Thank you.
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, through to Councillor Moore. Yes, it would be. If there was no requirement for a Saturday or Sunday, that schedule could fluctuate so that they do have some weekends off, but it will be fully dependent around our bookings and our requirements.
So with the recreation facilities attendant, they would be starting generally in the afternoon and working into the evening, so they would be just coordinating at the beginning of events. Like a lot of times there are simultaneous events at different community recreation associations, and would they be also responsible for closing up after each of these events?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. The intent would be to have them make contact with the renters and then do a follow-up at the end of the events. What we have found, even though we've got 7 buildings, very seldom have we had all 7 on the go at once. Generally, it's 2 to 3 at the most. Some events end earlier than others. So in reviewing our rental requirements, we feel that one person could substantially cover everything. We would still issue keys and in the rental procedure the same as we do now, and the renter would still be responsible for securing the building, and that if this person would follow up to ensure that everything is locked up and to do a check of the building at the end of the event.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Director Belcourt. With the recreation facility attendants, I know you've had issues in the past with the facility monitors. So, for example, sometimes Minising and Elmville could be booked every weekend. So are they going to work every weekend and then close at Elmville and then come to Minising at 2 in the morning? And I have a question with the crossing guard also. I'll do both. Is Hillsdale the only one that has a crossing guard, and why?
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, or Mayor Allen, through that, Councillor Chapman. Yes, that individual would be expected to move between the facilities. They do now work till late in the evening, and if we do have events where they're required every weekend, that they will be required. That will be a stipulation of the position. And with regards to the Hillsdale Crossing Guard, I don't know. It is the only location. I'm not exactly sure when it started, but we are required, because it was started and we do have it in place, we are now required to maintain that until there's a signalized intersection.
CAO Brindley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to echo those comments, yes. From a historic perspective, I'm unsure of when it started, but we've had that obligation. We've had even some inquiries to start to do something similar in Elmville, but we have not done that. But since historically we have done it, legally we have to keep doing it until, example, we have a situation where we might have a fully signalized intersection, but that's not expected for a number of years. And even in that case, we might have to phase it, because the legal ramifications of removing a crossing guard are extensive. If there would be an accident, someone hurt, we would be liable for that accident.
Councillor Moore?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Director Belcourt then. I didn't get the compensation breakdown for those 2 positions. If you could do that, thank you.
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councillor Moore. I believe the facility attendant would be at a higher step than the community worker. Maybe Director Schmidt can clarify.
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Moore. Yes, to Director Belcourt's comments, the community facility worker would be at a level slightly lower than the recreation facility attendant.
Follow on? You want to split in numbers?
I want a number, yeah.
No.
Sorry, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'll follow up with that information.
Thank you. Did you have a further question? Councillor Ritchie?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Mr. Belcourt. Facility monitors, just explain to me what's the reason for these and what they do, and the bit of the job description, please.
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councillor Ritchie. The purpose of having the facility monitors is to have a township presence during major events, primarily alcohol related, because we do have a legal obligation to ensure that the facility is being operated within the laws and in a legal manner, and also that if something were to happen, right now we're out on a limb as the way we used to operate, because honestly, we did not know what was going on in a lot of the buildings. These people are there just to monitor, not, and if there was assistance required during an event, let's say there was a breaker out or there's a power failure, these people would be able to address that issue right away. Or if there's other maintenance issue that needed to be done, that's primarily what they're there. They're there to provide assistance to the renter, not be the policeman, per se, like some people thought they were being. They were there to help and to ensure that our facilities are being respected and operated in a proper manner.
Let me ask, just along these lines, as an example, there have been incidences where people rent the community recreation association wherever and assume that they've got access to a rink, a pavilion if there is one, a baseball diamond if there is one. So if there is that confusion that leads to conflict, would this party recreation facility attendant be the one to approach and settle that, solve that? You say they're not policing, but are they clarifying?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Yes, they would be acting on the township's behalf. If it escalated to a point where they needed other help, either myself or the supervisor are available. And ultimately, if it escalates to the point where we need to have police interaction, then they would be calling the police.
Councillor Ritchie?
Yes, well, are they involved, thank you, Mayor Allen, are they involved with the cleanup of the facility as well, or is that separate?
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councilor Ritchie. They would not be doing the full custodial cleaning. They will be ensuring that if they're at the site, that people are putting the items away as required under their rental agreement. And if they're not on site, they will be doing the inspection after to see whether or not the renter complied with the rental agreement and whether or not we would hold their deposit or not. But as far as the actual cleaning of the facility, that would still be under another contract with the cleaning company.
Follow on?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Allen. So to role play this, there could be an event at the community hall in Elmvale, say there's a wedding there. There could be an event going on in Menacing, and also something the same weekend, say over in Hillsdale or Midhurst. So this person would be responsible for looking after all of these and attending all of these?
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councilor Ritchie. Yes, they would not be at each event monitoring like on a full-time basis. For example, a wedding, he or she would make their presence known, provide the renter with a call number if they're needed, so that they are available. But the intent is that they would move from facility to facility, ensure everything's proceeding as planned. And if everything's going well, there would be other duties assigned to them. You know, if they could check on other buildings and check on other sites while they're out. So they're acting as like a patrol person for our facilities, you know, in the evening, as well as assisting our renters and ensuring that they have an excellent event.
I think the position makes sense. As we get these community recreation association facilities fixed up, they're getting rented more and more. The activities are increasing. So there's the expectation that we're organized as a township to be able to make it clear and make sure that people are living by the contract and the agreements for usage, and that there is a quick resource if things start to get out of hand. Otherwise, it used to fall on police being called if that was necessary, or you being called, and volunteers had to get involved in it. So I think it does help in the situation. And Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you to Director Belcourt. The crossing guard position, is that provided during school months or full year?
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. It is proposed to be a year-round position whereby that individual would most likely use his holidays or her holidays during the summer months. And we'd also utilize them as part of our facility maintenance during the summer months as well. That's one of the issues we've found too over the last couple of years, is that individuals are having trouble using holidays because we just don't have enough bodies to cover everything. So that person would essentially switch into a facility maintenance, parks maintenance position, community maintenance. That's why we want to call it a community worker, because they will assist with all the events and, you know, do the running around, like for setting up events, moving supplies, and that'll allow the full-time maintenance people to continue on with their duties without having to interrupt their day.
Follow on?
Thank you. So we're not increasing the level of service with the crossing guard. I'm curious as to why if we're legally mandated to do this, why do we only have to provide a crossing guard for 10 months of the year if it's, well, I understand there's more children there, but I'm having trouble understanding what I'm being told is we are mandated or we need to supply a crossing guard, but we only have to do it for 10 months of the year?
CAO Brindley wanted to comment.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor to the Deputy Mayor. It's sort of, we're filling two things. One is we have an obligation for a crossing guard, and we've been advertising for 7 years to try to get a part-time crossing guard. And this is not just within Springwater, but this is systemic in the system. We cannot find crossing guards. So the concept here is to also have someone who can help with overfill duties related to Parks and Recreation and still fill our obligation related to crossing guard. I would love a situation where we could still just have a part-time crossing guard person, but we can't get them. And we've been advertising, we've been knocking on door knockers in Hillsdale, and I've seen similar stories even in the city of Toronto where we cannot find it. So we're trying to create a unique solution here where we have staff that will be there for the crossing guard component, but then give them other duties so they can do other catch-up things, that all the little stuff that we can't get to.
Follow on?
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate that. No, my question was more, how are we mandated? Is it by the MTO, or who's dictating to us that we need to provide this level of service? And why is it for only, I would assume because there's more children, but how is it that we're only legally obligated to do this for 10 months of the year?
If I might just add before you respond, so what happens if there's a snow day, for instance, or a PA day? Just incorporate that into the answer. Thanks, please.
Thank you to both the Mayor and Deputy Mayor. There's no law, but because we've done it for so many years, there's essentially an obligation in law that we provide that service. It's unfortunate, but many municipalities do this because they've been doing it for so long. When it comes to a snow day or things like that, maybe I'll ask maybe some people who see it, but I don't doubt that we go out just in case there are kids around. But at the same time, if there's no need, that person would if that person would be hired full-time, would then transfer to other responsibilities. But I know for a fact that sometimes we're out there just to make sure the kids are being taken care of. But for the other months of the year, no, we do not have to staff that location because school is out.
Okay. Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just a comment on that in particular. The crossing guards are always in place due to school traffic. There's very few locations in any municipality that I've worked in where crossing guard is in place just to assist people to cross the road. They're always there during mandated school periods for the children to get there and get back. So that's why they're only there for the 10 months. But I do have a question, Mayor Allen, directed to Director Belcourt. Actually, a couple of clarifications. I need to clarify, the facility monitors, the part-time people, are they going to remain in place along with this facility monitor individual?
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Councilor Cabral. It's not intended that we would keep the part-time people. We're looking at replacing the 3 positions with the 1 full-time.
Okay, that clarifies that, which then leads me to, we were talking about risk management and having the facility monitor in place where we have liquor licensed events. Having 3 people at 3 different locations, certainly that model allowed those things to happen. Having only one person, we're going to lose that aspect of monitoring when we have a time when there's 3 or 4 more facilities going on. That's more of a comment than anything else. But I was curious to know, with respect to the school crossing guard, what's the rate of pay for that individual?
Director Belcourt? He's looking at Director Schmidt.
I guess that would be Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Cabral. So the question was, how much do current crossing guards, how much are they being compensated right now?
Correct, right now.
Approximately $17 an hour.
Okay, and that would mean that whenever we send someone there to fill in for them right now, we're paying, I would suspect, a higher hourly rate plus the transportation costs to get staff there and back. Would that be fair? And I'd hate to say what the average would be, but I think it would be substantially more than $17 an hour. So maybe what our problem here isn't that we can't attract somebody, but maybe we should pay them what we're paying our staff to do that particular job when they do it, rather than pay them less money and expect them to do it on a regular basis. I don't know if that's a solution, but it's certainly something that comes to my mind with respect to that. And my last question would be, would the facility monitor and the community services people, would they incur costs for the Springwater Township as far as equipment and transportation needs would be concerned as well?
Between Director Schmidt and Director Belcourt, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through to Councillor Cabral. No, we're not anticipating any additional equipment requirements. Again, we're looking at diversifying and spreading our days out. Plus, throughout the years, we do make use of equipment that is going to be surplus. So we, for a few months' time, we are able to do that. But we don't envision any additional equipment requirements.
Follow on?
Oh, that's it.
Anybody else? Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you to Director Belcourt. There was conversation a year or so ago about a remote locking system for the facilities. Is that still something we're considering, or is this position going to not require that of us?
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through to Deputy Mayor Coughlin. We are looking still at some remote locking systems, but the cost is fairly substantial, and given some of the limitations around being able to use wireless communications in some areas, it makes it difficult. So we still would like to rely on the manual locking to ensure that the facilities are locked.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Director Belcourt. Could the crossing guard be on a contract for 10 months, pay them a little bit more, but maybe not as high as a normal township staff?
Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through to Councillor Chapman Ma. I have not personally been involved with the crossing guard situation up until now. I know Clerk Chaperone has been looking after it and has met a wall when it comes to trying to recruit people. I'm not sure what the issues are, but I know it's similar right across the board. I see advertisements for crossing guards from municipalities almost weekly.
CEO Brindley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Chapman. The challenge is it's not, to me, just a matter of aligning additional dollars. People don't want to do this job anymore. People don't have the ability or don't want to come out for a few hours in the morning and at lunch and at dinner. If they want a job, they want a job that's actually either full-time or longer. And as I've mentioned, it is a common challenge. You have these certain positions which are crossing guards, dump truck drivers, and school bus drivers. You can't get them anymore. People just don't want to do the jobs. And we have a challenge in Hillsdale is they require someone really from that community to do that job if it's this nature. And even if it's a matter of aligning additional funds, I still don't think we would find a person who'd be doing the job because of the nature of a few hours here, a few hours in the middle of the day, and a few hours, like an hour and a half or so at different intervals. People just aren't looking for those kind of jobs anymore. So I wish it was a matter of aligning some additional dollars to the position. I still don't think we'd be successful.
Councillor Ritchie.
I just want to comment, Mayor Allen, like, I mean, if we look at the development that's scheduled for Hillsdale, I'm sure within the next 2 years, shovels are going in the ground. And the amount of more traffic and the more kids, I can see, you know, we're going to be back, if we don't start with this now, we're going to be back here searching harder than ever before for this, to fill this position. So I think, you know, like, I think we need to follow through with this. That's just my thoughts on that. And if there's other jobs that you can do to, and obviously staff has done that, they've done a good job at that, to keep the guy busy in order to create a full-time job. So and let's face it, this is a dangerous job. Because, you know, some people don't slow down or they don't see. I've sat there and watched it, especially in the morning, if it's a sunny morning, like they have a hard time seeing the lights. Like, I'll tell you, you need somebody that's pretty feisty out there to make that traffic slow down. So we can get somebody to do it. God bless them. Thanks.
Councillor Cabral.
Through Mayor Allen, thank you. To Director Belcourt, I'm just curious, what are the exact timeframes for the crossing guard? Do you know?
Director, I'll actually turn that over to Clerk Chaperon, please.
Thank you. So the shifts are actually 1 hour prior to school starting, 1 hour at lunch, and 1 hour at the end of the day.
What time does school
The exact times, they start from 8:10 a.m. to 9:10 a.m., I believe, for the prior, before school. And the after school is from 3:15 till 4:15. It's the lunch hour. I'm not too sure exactly if it's 12 or 12:15 start time.
Any follow-on, Councillor Cabral?
I'm just trying to see how that would play into someone who was, you know, reporting for duty, getting to the location, whether or not they could actually do that in an 8-hour day. Get to the school crossing, do it, go do whatever they're going to do in between, come back for lunch, do it, and then stay there until the end of the time frame they'd be required, which is 4:15. Whether or not they would be able to do that in an 8-hour window, that's all.
CAO Brinley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Councillor Cabral. I'll give you an example because of the number of parks we have in that area. If it's, you know, a nicer day, that individual would do that duty and then go visit a number of parks, collect garbage. And so feasibly that position would be able to essentially on the eastern side of Springwater attend to a number of different jobs through that period and still come back during those periods of time.
I'm sorry, maybe I was misunderstood. What I'm getting at is if school starts at 8:10 and he has to be there at 7:10 in the morning to address the crossing, and then the last period of the day would be end time of the day without incurring overtime every day. I don't know if he's reporting right there. I think he has to report to where he's going to be working to pick up his vehicle. So I'm looking at, it's going to have to be like at least a 9-hour shift is what I'm seeing.
Director Belcourt.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through to Councillor Cabral. He would have to be on site at 8:10, not at 7:10. The school day starts at 9:10, so at 8:10, which would allow them time to report to Elmville, obtain a vehicle, be on site, and then at 4:15 leave to finish his day in Elmville.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you to whoever might be able to answer this question. So the end goal is to have a fully functional crosswalk, and understanding the difficulties with the MTO. What would it cost us to retrofit that crosswalk and just have the crosswalk operational now?
I'll start with CAO Brinley. Maybe you might want to comment on our delegation and any other information that we're trying to pursue, and also the future potential with the other development of signalization somewhere in that corridor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to the Deputy Mayor. The base cost, just to get to the cost part of it, is at least $250,000. We are already negotiating with the developers of the neighboring subdivision to actually pay for that as long as, and also probably as part of the development charges, to provide funding for that intersection. The challenge is it's still timing. One is to us to update the development charges, or to do that work still takes a couple of years. And even from a engineering justification, as you're aware, the engineers have all these tables and they look at growth. We still don't see that being signalized for a couple of years. As the Deputy Mayor mentioned, we were actually even delegating to the Ministry of Transportation down at Roma this year, because at this moment, the Ministry of Transportation maintains that it's not needed. So one is advocating at the provincial level to allow them, or for them to give us permission to do the signalization. And then it'll still take, from the standpoint of enough traffic and enough analysis, it'll still take a few years. And in that time, let's say it happens 3 years from now, a few things will happen. First of all, we won't need the staff person to staff that signalized intersection more, because it's fully signalized. But I don't doubt one of two things: either we reduce that person, or the other side, if additional growth happens in the municipality, more fields to clean, I don't doubt that we could find other work for that individual. But it could be very well, it'd be still probably 3 to 4 years before we'd actually even see that signalization, assuming the Ministry of Transportation allows us to signalize it. Now, council could, in advance, look at paying for that, but it is in the area of about $250,000.
I'd just like to make a quick comment. This is a situation that we definitely, as a township, need to cover the way it needs to be covered because of the potential liability. That intersection, that cross-section, is an accident waiting to happen, with a guard there or without a guard there. And that's why we're trying to get the existing signalization improved. It's an experiment by MTO, and that's why for sure we have to make sure, in my opinion, as a township, that we staff that crossing at the crucial hours, minimum crucial hours that we're talking about here. So we can't skimp in this area because of the potential liability. Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and I guess this is more of a comment. When I was in contact with Board 3, the level of service, there's a concern that because we're providing something like this in Hillsdale, which is crossing a highway, essentially, the communities of Minising and other schools are, wanting the same thing. So is there are we liable at all when our residents have brought this to our attention of near misses with all those kids in Minising and Elmvale? I'm just curious about level of standard level of service.
CEO Brindley.
Thank you, through the mayor to the deputy mayor. And I can see your concern, but because we have not provided the service, we are not obligated to continue to provide the service. In law, it's called nonfeasance versus malfeasance. If we haven't done it, then we're not really responsible. But if we have done it and change it and become where we've changed it to the negative, then we are liable for it. So an example is, as in Elmvale or in Minising, we haven't provided that service. Just as an added note, a long time ago, the school boards used to actually pay for this kind of service in some communities, and the school boards pulled back from that. So a lot of municipalities today are paying for crossing guards when at one time they were actually paid for by the school boards.
Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. A couple of comments. One with respect to Hillsdale and Minising and Elmvale, for that matter. The roads in those other jurisdictions are county roads. 93 is still a provincial highway. That may have something to do with it, because my recollection is that in Elmvale they did have a crossing guard where the McDonald's is there now, and when the lights went in, that crossing guard no longer was there. So That's my thoughts on that one. It's may have something to do with the fact that 93 is still a provincial highway. My other comment is with respect to making a signalized intersection there and looking at maybe bearing those costs. The weight of a signalized intersection versus what's there now, as far as the driver is concerned, there's no more legal liability, in my opinion, because the penalties are exactly the same. Once we signalize an intersection at that zone, I think we're still going to have the same issues we have now with the sun, because we'll still only be viewing 2 red lights, which is what you see now when you come up to that intersection. So I really, if anything, I would think that when the intersection is signalized and traffic and pedestrian traffic warrant such a thing to happen, that's when we're going to find out that we're going to still require to have a crossing guard at that location. I don't think it's going to go away.
Any further comment or discussion? Good discussion on this. Okay, we'll move on to fire. A couple of items on fire, please. So start with Chief Gavay.
Thank you, Worship. Members of Council, so the first item is for an increase to our firefighter training hours. The main rationale behind this, in 2018 we had a very busy year. We were up 12.5% for our call volume. Unfortunately, we were unable to stop responding to calls, so really the only place we could technically cut money from was our training budget. So we did have to cut some non-essential recurring refresher training, which was not well received by our firefighters, but essentially we had to stick to our budget. What we're really asking for is for council to approve essentially guaranteed training hours and guaranteed training offerings to the firefighters that wish to take advantage of them. This covers normal refresher training for existing firefighters, training recruits, and training for new skills and competencies. As a previous term of council was aware, the province introduced a mandatory certification regulation for firefighters across Ontario, which would have rolled out in summer of 2019. And then on the last day, they changed their mind because they had an issue implementing it in the northern part of the province. They have assured us it's coming back in the very near future. And my guess would be that they're going to announce that probably somewhere around the summer with an unknown implementation date either this year or next. The downside to that is as soon as that regulation is introduced and officers are required to be certified for the job that they're doing, many of our officers won't actually be able to function in that area at all. And the existing officers that exist within the day staff are going to get burnt out because they'll literally have to go to every single call. So what we're really trying to do is, in the absence of that mandatory certification at this particular moment in time, is to start training those members of the department who wish to develop further, basically to do the jobs that we already expect them to do. In past years, we've had members who've actually had to pay to take training on their own, such as Firefighter 2, which is a more advanced level of suppression firefighter. We're trying to actually implement that this year, run a driving training program for the first time in a couple of years, and basically to run training that relates to the essential tasks that each individual rank basically has to do. These certifications are internationally recognized. They're the same ones that the province wants us to roll out as a fire service across Ontario. And they basically mirror the NFPA consensus standards, which in turn mirrors the Fire and Emergency Services higher education model that's recognized both in Canada and the United States. By following these standards and teaching our staff who are not grandfathered, as well as those that are grandfathered but want the knowledge, we're requesting funding to ensure that as a responsible employer, our people are trained to do the jobs they are fulfilling. This in turn reduces the township's liability and responsibility that risks in the event of a line of duty, death or injury. Only those members who have completed the required training for their existing role will be trained in new subjects where it makes sense to do so. And with that, I guess we're ready to take some questions.
Okay, so this is the first item, which is the extra training. If I heard you correctly, or understood you correctly, you said that the province was mandating this extra training. They pulled back on it, but you think it is, they're going to come back with this in the near future. And then I heard you make mention of some of this training was previously paid for by the firefighters, was it? Maybe if you just go over that a little slower and clarify that.
Thank you, Worship, for your questions. Yes, I'm going to try to hit on everything. Probably should have written those down. But basically, in the instance of Firefighter 2, the firefighters, if they wanted to take that extra knowledge, which would enable them to lead an interior attack team, basically signed up for it on their own, went off to the college or the nearest regional training center, taking time off of work, and we weren't able to basically pay for that because it's never been done before in the township. Something that we changed as an interim measure was that if people still wanted to do that and implemented this past year, was basically we would pay for their day of examinations, we'd cover their registration costs, but again, as it wasn't budgeted at the beginning of the year, we didn't pay for the actual course. What we're essentially asking this year is in cases such as these, that we're actually covering the books, we're covering their time in the classroom, and we're covering their certification day costs. While not covering their lunch exactly, our proposition was basically to pay them their lunch hour, so that would in fact duly compensate them. Because I don't think it's really fair, and I could be the only one, but I don't think our firefighters should be having to pay for training out of their own pocket. And it certainly makes sense to me to make sure that they don't have to do so in future. With regards to the question for the province, so I can remember myself being forced to go down the NFPA road in 2004 and have been continually certifying or recertifying ever since to stay competent. Basically, there have been a number of line of duty deaths and or training deaths in the province of Ontario, and the coroner's inquest have basically said, we understand the challenges within the province of Ontario, whereas many different fire departments have different levels of funding and resources available to them, and the pressures on volunteer firefighters being able to go away to schools, so whether you train them in-house like we're proposing to do, whether you send them to the Ontario Fire College or a regional training centre, basically you need to bring in these professional, nationally recognised standards and training and certification to make sure that, or enable to mitigate the likelihood of any firefighter deaths either in training or in service.
So just to clarify, the reason this element is a program change request versus in the budget for the fire department is because it's not mandated at this point? Is that an assumption, correct?
Thank you, Worship. So certain parts of the training that you would find in the spreadsheet that I sent to you today, those are existing trainings that we've always done, such as the bare minimum for recruit firefighters. When we start looking at courses such as Instructor 1, Officer 1, pumper operations, hazmat operations, driver training, etc., those are all things that we need to do in order to satisfy the NFPA requirements. So we're basically covering our butt and making sure our people have the skills they need to do their job.
But again, I asked the question, why is this a proposed program change rather than in the budget itself?
Sorry, Your Worship. I basically got a little off course there, but basically it's a program change because there's a fair portion of money that wasn't requested in the previous year. Director of Finance, Deputy CAO, instructed me that I needed to fill out a program change and present it to Council, which I agree with.
Okay, I'll open it up. Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor. And further to the Mayor's question, Chief, it's confusing for me to understand this because we have the recruit training that we have to provide to new firefighters that we bring on. I understand this training that you're asking for here, this additional recertification training. This is something in addition to that. So in my mind, is it this necessary in addition, because we're already providing the recruit training, make sure our firefighters recruit are certified, but the way I read this, it sounds like this is something in addition to that, and I'm not confident that it's something we have to do. That's, I guess, the question I'm trying to ask.
Chief Cuvée.
Thank you, Worship. So basically we do provide our recruit trainings with a basic level of training. Some of that is required by the province, such as Firefighter 1. The pump operations program that we've run in the past basically met the old criteria from the Ontario Fire College, but what's being run there now and what we're proposing to run is essentially the NFPA curriculum. You're not required to do it yet. However, the province almost introduced it just before Christmas, then pulled out at the last minute and has told us it's coming back in the near future. So I guess, there's kind of a risk benefit analysis that you could conduct to say, well, I don't necessarily have to do all of it now, so you can go ahead, Director, and reduce your program request. But the risk to that is if they do suddenly decide to implement it again in the summer, the fall, or in this budget year in general, is that you're going to have to find the money for it from reserves or wherever else, because it'll be immediate, and you won't have a pile of pre-agreed money specifically allocated to the training.
Follow on, Councillor Hannah.
Thank you. So is this seen as a detriment to, or a threshold deterrent to our fire recruits that they don't want, or our current fire volunteers that don't want to do this extra training?
Chief Cavey?
Thank you, Worship. So some of it they would have no choice. So for our officers, for instance, when the legislation comes back again, they have to have it. There's no opt-in, and had it gone through before Christmas, we would have lost some of our district chiefs and probably some of our captains also. Because they wouldn't want to take the training for whatever reason. Maybe they're past the age that they really want to be sitting in a class, whatever their personal reasons may be. But the majority of people do actually want the training. So when you look at the spreadsheet that I sent out today, you'll see a number of people that are interested in these courses. And it not only addresses our current needs and those people that are currently in the roles, but it also addresses succession planning within the ranks, so that you have a pool of people that you can promote from within without having to wait to train somebody else.
Councillor Hannah.
Thank you. Last question on this. So there's nothing definite yet that we have to provide this. You're just being proactive. Is that correct?
Chief?
Thank you, Worship. So some of it is required. Some of the NFPA certifications are required, such as Firefighter 1. However, you are not actually required to do all of the things I've asked for now. We are a very proactive and progressive department. In fact, we were ready to go down the road that would have been required under the mandated legislation. I'm extensively qualified in NFPA certification and able to teach. So is the deputy. We've spent a fair amount of money sending the training officer away to make sure that he can train within. And the intent is that we'll probably end up opening as a regional training centre, basically to offer more fire departments the opportunity to train locally rather than having to send their firefighters away to the college, but always giving preference to our own people.
Just for clarification on that point, so as I heard you just interpreted what you just said, the extra hours in training to make up this 154,000 are for those to take still yet not mandated training, but only those that are interested. Some are not included in that budgeted figure because they're not interested in taking the training?
Thank you, Worship. You're absolutely right. So rather than putting in a request for everybody to take the training, which I would think would be unrealistic and fiscally irresponsible, basically we polled our firefighters last year to say, hey, we think this legislation is going to come in. How many people are interested in signing up for it? And therefore we'd know how many were perhaps not able to stay in the positions they're in. And then when we heard that the certification wasn't coming just yet, we then further refined that list. So the extra certification things, such as specialization courses, it's literally the people that want to do it now, which means it's a much softer burden on the taxpayer than just sort of saying everybody has to do it and we'll mandate it even though the province hasn't yet.
Just further to that, when the province does come in and increase the requirement or mandates it, assuming that they do, what period of time do they give generally for completion of what increased training they require?
Thank you, Worship. So basically with firefighting, it's pretty much 6 months or less. With the officer courses, I don't have the folder in front of me for it, so I'll just look at my two colleagues that are sitting in the room, but I believe it was 12 months notice.
Okay, other questions? All right, moving on to the next item related to fire, please.
Thank you, Worship, members of Council. So the next item that you'll see is for probationary firefighter staffing. The amount being $67,109, which essentially takes the existing probationary firefighter that we have working and takes them from 35 hours a week to 40, which basically means that they will be staying at the fire station to have their lunch, rather than being able to do anything they like and go anywhere they like within their lunch break. So that increases the level of protection. And then the new position that we're asking for this year to bring that number up to 2 basically is for a 40-hour-week position, and that includes, I believe, wages and benefits. Is that correct, Director of Finance, Deputy CAO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Perfect, thank you. So basically, we have some challenges in Springwater with being a bedroom community. It's not really a new thing for the province or for Canada, but basically we have sort of three very much bedroom communities, predominantly being Minising, Midhurst, and Hillsdale. The biggest issue that we have is that about 52% of our calls are actually run in the south end of the township. We're looking through the Midhurst secondary plan to add another 20,000 residents to that area. And basically, we don't have an issue with staffing like a lot of fire departments would, in that we don't have enough people. We have enough people, but they're also part of the bedroom community. So not always, but increasingly more often, we don't seem to have enough responders in the south end to respond in a timely fashion with enough people on the truck to make a difference. This is not because our volunteers are bad people. To be honest, I'd kind of like to keep that system, but it doesn't address the gap that we're seeing. So with that being said, our challenge is really around our most population-dense areas. So if we look at Centre Vespero, the build out of Stonewood Manor, Stone Gate, the Midhurst secondary plan, Carson Road building out, we really want to make sure that we have enough responders on the truck in a timely fashion to get out the door. So when I look at the response figures for Station 2, it is by far, and that's Midhurst, by the way, which also covers Centre Vespero currently, they're at just under 8 minutes just to get the truck out the door. Basically, we'd be looking to get the truck out the door much quicker with 2 people plus whichever volunteers showed up, supplemented by additional volunteers who are later arriving, and also by the career staff that are available. We are seeing a greater number of structure fires, grass and brush fires, motor vehicle collisions, utility hazards, and CO alarms. Basically, with the build-out, we can expect these numbers to continue increasing. Somewhat similarly to the training program, basically, we're looking to get ahead of the curve. We're trying to gradually increase the full-time complement in order to provide a reliable service to our populace during the day. The volunteers do a great job. I just need to get more people out quicker. Maybe the need will not continue. The need will not continue to exist. However, I can't see it happening that way. So that's the 40,000-foot view, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of technical questions or more in-depth ones, which we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, questions, comments? Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you to Chief Gavay. Was there an opportunity following this? I know that when we purchase something within the budget, it's simply a placeholder, and then we have discussion where if it's over 50,000, they come back. I'm hesitant to, as you know, as I've expressed myself, I'm hesitant to approve this as I don't feel that there has been enough communication between council, fire, staff, and our residents. Thank you for the supplemental report that you did provide, and in it stating that, to quote myself, but it's not that I feel that the community doesn't want it. I don't know what our community wants, and I personally don't have the information I need in order to make this decision, because like I've expressed before, I do think there are ramifications and possible unions, and there's things that I don't know enough about, and I don't think that they're being addressed during this process, nor do I feel that during budget is the proper time to do it. I'm not suggesting that that isn't the right plan. I'm not suggesting that our fire master plan isn't correct. I do think that council as a whole needs to be comprised of what it's going to look like and what fire is going to look like in 2025 and moving forward. Even in your opening statements, your opening remarks today, we talked about Centre Vespero, opening the hall, building over in Midhurst, 20,000 people coming. This is a bigger issue, but I feel if we jump into this in the way that I feel that I'm being pushed into it, I don't feel that I would be comfortable even saying no, because I do trust in your expertise and the colleagues that you have with you. But I think that there needs to be much more communication about how this is structured. For example, the one full-time firefighter we have now, has he been out? Like, how many calls has he been attending? How many has he rescued us from? Meaning, if he wasn't there, we wouldn't have had the people to go out to it. There's a lot of information that I do want, and I don't know if through you or staff, if there's an opportunity to have that session provided to council.
Director Gouvet? Chief Gouvet, sorry.
Thank you, Worship. Deputy Mayor brings up an excellent point, and I've got to admit I do agree with you. The trouble is I have a gap now. Aside from that, ordinarily, the community does dictate the level of response that it expects, and then in council, allocates resources accordingly. It's unfortunate the last few master fire plans, which I was not here for, nor to specify, didn't really touch on that stuff. It did a very much 40,000-foot view of everything. I think irrespective of what happens in this budgetary process, whether or not council entertains and or approves this position, the next fire master plan, whichever way you want to move those two particular words around, it needs to take into account, there needs to, I don't know that necessarily needs to be a plebiscite, but there certainly needs to be some consultation with the community. We certainly hear from the ones that are discontent about our response times, but we don't hear from the silent majority. So I think, next fire master plan, definitely needs to go out, consult with the community, take a look at some of the studies that were referenced in relation to my report, take a look at the economic impacts to the community growth and everything that's planned. Because the biggest issue that we have is we tend to give you this information, and it's what we would do in our educated and experienced opinion. We don't have any real guiding document that basically says what's the best thing for the community, which you would ordinarily expect to get out of the fire underwriter survey or the master fire plan. So in the absence of that, we just say, here's what we think the issues are, here's where we're planning in the absence of any direction at all to go. What do you think? And if there's not enough information for you, I certainly support, whether you put the money there and either do or don't spend it, or you take the money and you spend it on a new fire master plan, that's entirely up to you. But I certainly agree with you. It's unfortunate that we're in the position that we have a fire master plan that really didn't address this. And whatever happens, we need to do a greater level of, or we need a consultant to do a greater level of consultation with the public to find out what they want, what they expect, so that hopefully can guide your decision making, in my opinion.
Follow on?
Thank you, and as long as it's clear that I'm not asking for another MFP, I don't think that that's what's going to solve this issue. I'm not asking for the time to undergo or hire another consultant to do that. The consultation that I want to happen is simply fire sitting with council, sitting with staff, a message out to the community, receiving information in a wholesome way that I can see what it's going to be 20 years from now or 10 years from now, because our fire brigade, as it's called, it's going to change. That's not an issue. I'm not saying that we're not going to have a full-time fire force at some point. It's just I believe that it needs to be very calculated, and we need to all understand the ramifications that can happen, because saying that we don't need another full-time fire, I would, if there's an accident and it's my decision that someone's house burns down, like you know that. I really need to make sure that this is the right decision right now, and I don't have that information in front of me.
Okay, Councillor Hanna?
Thank you, Mayor. The deputy raises some good points, and I agree. I want to thank the chief. He met with a couple of us and answered some of the questions I had. One of the questions I meant to ask, Chief, and I forgot to ask is, when was the last time we had a targeted recruitment, say, to the southern part of our township, looking for people that would be available, that work and live in the area and would be available because of shift work, whatever, to respond to calls during the daytime? Have you any idea when the last time, I'm sure you do, when the last time we had an actual targeted recruitment program for that?
Chief Cabay, and as part of that answer, maybe you just inform us any other information that might have been discussed with Councillor Hanna and Councillor Moore that the other councillors should be aware of.
Thank you, Worship. If you'll bear with me for a couple of minutes, I've just got to cast my mind back to those conversations to make sure I hit all the points, and I'll write them down so we don't end up going in a circle. Thank you for indulging me with the in the break whilst I wrote a couple of things down. I know I've missed one, so I'm going to reach out to the two councillors and ask me to remind them of what I'd forgotten. However, I'll start with your points first, Councillor Hanna. So essentially, the last time we had in fact, to my knowledge, the only time we've had a targeted recruitment. Basically is we started months in advance of our regular recruitment trying to get people for the area of Hillsdale, which also has a significant gap in it, not necessarily out of hours, but certainly during the day. And that yielded reasonable results, to the point where I think, we're probably going to see the staffing complement increase to almost 20. Is that correct, Deputy Chief? Okay, so basically when we do a recruitment, we advertise in all parts of the all parts of the township, and we typically get a great response, especially for places like Midhurst, where they tend to see fire trucks a little more frequently than they do in Minnesing or Hillsdale. And I do believe there are going to be a fairly respectable number heading there, and I'll just consult with my colleague to find out how many roughly. Thank you for indulging me again with the pause. So we should be up to 28 after this particular recruit class is done. We were at 25 at the beginning of this past year. We're down to about 23 now. So we will actually have the highest number of firefighters per station in Midhurst by the end of this current recruit class. When it comes to the conversation that I had with the two councillors prior to this meeting starting, so basically there was a concern raised around the accuracy of a piece of software that we call the Firefighter Response Software, or FFRS, and basically they expressed some concerns that they'd heard about the accuracy of that. Basically what I said is, it's easy to use. I'm pretty sure a 5-year-old can use it. If you have a smartphone, it's a case of you get your call, you hit a button on it, and you don't have to touch anything else, and it lets everybody know that you're coming, which in turn enables us, the chief officers that are responding to a serious call, to ensure that we have enough resources coming from that station and from any other. The problem we have is we have a small contingent, very small. We have a number of great volunteers that use it very regularly, and we find them very reliable. There are some who like to make excuses. I was not born using FFRS. It was introduced to me by my last employer, and like most people, if I do something about 10 or more times, I find it quite easy to do it, as long as I actually think of it. So like I say, the majority of the time it's pretty accurate. However, there are some exceptions to that. If the call's really serious, and I mean, sort of probably the 1 or 2% of the calls that we get that I would put in that category, I could forgive firefighters for not hitting the button. But the average of them are, not that serious, they certainly can take 10 seconds to use it. So, basically, with FFRS, I provided a picture in the document that I gave council and was made available to the public, the firefighter backgrounder for the full-time position. Basically, I had a slide in it. So what that slide showed was, if memory serves me correctly, that out of 43 firefighters in the South End, so basically out of Minnesing and Midhurst, at a call just before Christmas, I got 3 volunteer firefighters. And the unfortunate part of that was many more showed that they were available, but when the chips were down and we actually needed them, basically I got 3. After that call was done and the trucks were put away, the 2 of the 3 were no longer not available, so I had 1 person for the South End plus the day staff. This is an exception. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes there are more that say that are available and don't come, like on that occasion, and there are some that say they're not available and they do come. And I would certainly expect that would be the case for somebody who was responding to a structure fire, and maybe they were going to be responding to other calls because they had some kind of family commitment. So it is hit or miss, but I'd say most of the time it's at least 90% accurate. That's in my professional opinion. In addition to that, we had a little chat about unionisation and, why did I put unionisation in there? And to the Deputy Mayor's point that she just brought up, one of her concerns is unionisation. So I just had to make it very clear that, our volunteers could unionise tomorrow if they wanted to, so long as they get 51% of the membership to sign cards. However, I don't believe that's what they want to do, but certainly that option is out there. And if you had 3 or more full-time staff, which excludes the division chief for training, the division chief for fire prevention, myself and the deputy chief, because we're management and have disciplinary powers, basically with the 1 probationary firefighter we have today and the 1 that we get tomorrow, unionisation is not going to be an issue because they can't unionise. And if it got to the point where there were 4, basically, if you have 3 members, they can unionise, assuming that they wish to. However, I found over the years that if you treat people fairly, you communicate with them honestly, and generally, you pay them pretty well, they don't typically feel the need to unionise. It's usually more about the money.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Then, really just for council, I was asking Chief Gavay really more about structural questions. I wasn't familiar with and you probably saw my email about the organizational chart. So I wanted to figure out in my own head where staffing were located. And so Chief Gabay cleared that up for me that full-time staff are located in Minising, and the other halls are basically empty all the time. And, but that they travel quite a bit. So then I wasn't sure if they responded to all calls, which they do, but they sort of come from anywhere. So that's not really timely, depending on where they are. And the other thing was the concentration of calls more recently has been at the south end of our township, so maybe down more around Center Vesper Way. And I was asking if they could do the targeted recruitment for the probationary firefighter in that area so that they could have more timely response. And so I wasn't sure of what they had done in the past for hiring. So that's really what I was asking.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Any further comments, Chief Cavay, related to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to reinforce the councillor's memory, which was excellent, much better than mine. So basically, the day staff, typically we're based out of Minising. We always try to keep about 2 people there, but there are times that we're all busy somewhere else. You know, the Division Chief Fire Prevention's out doing code enforcement or follow-up inspections or public education at a school. Deputy Chief could be out on a supply run, dropping off windshield fluid or breathing air cylinders, or going to get something in a building fixed. I could be in a meeting here in Barrie or somewhere else, and the training officer could be here or somewhere else doing health and safety inspections, or basically he's the coordinator for health and safety, so he also is not directly attached to the station and stays there all day. So we can be essentially anywhere, but we usually try to have at least 2 of us in the south end, because again, we know the challenges and the gap that exists in the south end. Again, with targeted recruitment, yes, it's certainly something that we could look into for the Midhurst area, but you know, I mean, we're at 28 volunteers now. You know, you have a bedroom community. The majority of those firefighters are not retired, so they are part of the bedroom community that's leaving the area every day. And while I'm open to trying anything, I think Einstein said the definition of madness was trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's really my only fear, is that, you know, we're going to continue to get a great deal of applications from people that want to be a firefighter in Midhurst because it runs more calls. But the trouble we're having is they're applying to us from Moonstone and Collingwood and other places, and they don't meet the response time to get to the station, which is, you know, sort of 10 minutes or less, in order to, again, affect a timely response.
Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through to Chief Gabay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but did I hear something there about part of the budget being for lunch at the fire hall?
Chief Cavay, when and where?
Thank you, Worship. So basically, the intent is, rather than paying for lunch, which apparently is very expensive in Ontario, being a transplant, rather than having lots of different receipts coming in, you know, some people, when other people.
I think we're on the same page. Sorry, Chief Gabay. I was speaking about the probationary firefighter. I think the hours of work being to turn it to a 40-hour a week in order that we have him stay at the station to have his lunch. Are we on the same page now?
Chief Cavay?
Thank you, Worship, to Councillor Cabral. Sorry, I was on
okay.
on the training thing from before. So basically, right now, the probationary firefighter that was recruited at the end of last year using existing resources after a vacancy, basically that person can go anywhere he likes on his lunch break. So whether it's into Barrie or wherever, the intent is, whether we successfully get the additional position or not, basically they will not have that freedom anymore. I don't expect they'll be there for an hour, but yes, you are essentially paying them to have them there, because the township does not pay its employees on lunch break, so basically they're entitled to go wherever, and that's the same for any of the day staff that currently work.
Councillor Hanna?
Thank you, Mayor. I did bring up about the recruited targeting program because Georgian College offers a fire service training course that we know, and we also rent Station 1 out to Georgian College for fire students, and I just saw them as a opportunity to have people that are here in the daytime that could respond, and that was one of the questions. But to alert the rest of the council, we had 2 other questions for the chief, which was he's kind enough to answer, and that was the recruit trainings for experienced applicants. experienced applicants from other police services have to attend the same amount of recruit training as non-experienced applicants? That was one of the questions. And the other was, do our full-time fire service people respond to volunteer calls after their day shift on weekends or in the evenings? And that was the other two questions we asked.
Can you just give us the answer? Because I don't think we all necessarily know the answers to those things.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Councillor Hannah. So basically, when I first started here, it didn't matter if you were a full-time firefighter somewhere else and already certified and experienced. The department still made those people go through the full recruit training. One of the benefits of that is that there's a stronger bond with the other recruits that started at the same time. However, while I do think that that's important, I did change it. So basically, those people can get fast-tracked. So essentially, they skip the hours and hours, in this case, hundreds of hours sitting in the classroom. And basically, all we get them to do is to come to the orientation session, which basically tells them what's expected of them from a behavior and response standpoint and what they can expect from us. That's less than an hour. And then basically, an additional training weekend or two will be thrown into the recruit window, whereby these people will be expected to come to prove that they can still do the job. So if they've been off sick or injured at their regular full daytime job as a firefighter somewhere else, we know that they still remember everything they're doing, but it gets them onto the trucks faster, which basically means there's a better level of protection for the community. With respect to the probationary firefighter that is currently working for us between 8:30 and 4:30, no, he does not respond to calls outside of hours as a all-you-can-eat buffet, if you will. So, if he wants to, he can go the same way as a volunteer firefighter. The issue that you have with the existing management staff is the trouble is you can earn so much time off doing that that basically through bank time and flex time, that it's kind of hard to get you in the office when we actually need you for meetings and other things. So it presents some challenges, but also throughout my past in different unionized fire departments that are composite, it also creates real problems when you have two associations. So whether it's a volunteer association, non-unionized, and a unionized component, basically when they have to step out of one world into another, there's usually friction between the two associations. They have conflicting interests, especially with unionized career firefighters, because they're typically treated better by the employer by way of their collective agreement and whatever they've bargained. And when it becomes such a problem that you need to get them as the employer out of the volunteer world, so to speak, you usually have to give something up, something in the way of a concession, and there usually isn't something coming back across the table from the career end.
Other questions? Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. And when is our next recruit scheduled for?
Chief?
Thank you, Your Worship, through the Deputy Mayor. So basically, we just completed one recruitment for 2018. Those recruits have started. Training's underway with our training officers sitting in the back of the room. The Deputy and I were talking the other day, though we haven't had a lot of time to talk recently because of the current workload and trying to get questions out and coming back from a conference and still getting the regular work done. But our initial thought is we're probably going to run another one probably in the fall just to address any gaps that we have. And that certainly could be targeted at the south end if that's the will of council.
Follow on?
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Allen, to Chief Gavay. And the other change that was made to fire by removing the admin assistant, and just from hearing about over the workload, and we have deputy chiefs going to pick things up, and you guys are doing all, like, how is that working? Is that something that needs to be addressed? Is that going to be coming forward in another budget to replace that position again?
Chief?
Thank you, Worship. Great question for the Deputy Mayor. So basically, we replaced the administrative assistant position with a part-time or probationary firefighter, I should say. That individual starting to do some administration work for us now. They've only been in their job for about a month and a half, so we're trying to keep them away from our very finicky records management systems detailed entries until they've had sufficient time to train. To address the issue of us going to deliver things, that's the way it's always been. There are not enough people that work here during the day to basically fill all the logistical needs of the department and still do our main functions. I would say since the deputy chief and I have been doing the majority of the administration work, we've made it work, and we're happy to do so for the short to medium time. I can't say it's not coming back or that it is coming back, the the position of administrative assistant, but for now we're coping, and the quality of the work doesn't seem to be suffering.
So the person who was hired to replace the previously admin position, they are being trained as well to be able to go out on calls. Is that correct? They're in the process of training, or are they have gone out on calls? They're not trained yet to go out on calls. Is that correct?
Thank you, Worship. The individual that we employed was one of our own members. So that person came from Station 2 and was a volunteer member before. He's fully trained to go out on calls. Basically, we didn't train him to become an administrative assistant because the issue that we have with daytime availability in the South End. That's the reason we went that way. We put a probationary firefighter position in there. So basically, he will be able to assist us with calls whilst he's in menacing. If the second position gets hired as part of this budget process, both of those individuals will be posted to Midhurst, and they will be helping us with minor administrative tasks, as the one we have now does. And the one that we now have is also starting to assist with some of the logistical running around that we would ordinarily be doing.
So the reason that you're requesting by this program change an additional probationary firefighters, because through more aggressive recruiting of volunteer firefighters, it still doesn't get them in the right location and available at the right time. Is that correct? So you need this to solve that problem?
Thank you, Worship. You may have to steer me back, but basically the intent is to put 2 people in Midhurst to more effectively cover during the day Centre Vespret and the areas of Midhurst, where the majority of our population is now, and where we're going to add another 20,000 residents here probably in the next 5 years. So we're trying to get a little bit ahead of the curve. And as per the program change and some of the more detailed information that came out since then, basically the intent is where there is an almost 8-minute time from the time of the call to the first fire truck actually leaving the station. We propose that in the absence of a master fire plan or community engagement, that we should be looking to increase those number of people during the day to a total of 4 based out of the Midhurst station. So you'd have a 4-person engine company that can roll out of the fire station and go and tackle whatever the emergency be. Should that be a structure fire, there's enough for the 2-in, 2-out rule in firefighting, which enables that company to get to work immediately upon arrival to effect a rescue.
And this can't be accomplished by recruiting and hiring more volunteer firefighters to service those areas in the hours that are necessary. That's what you're saying?
Ultimately, yes. The volunteer model that we have now, basically it's almost 8 minutes before the truck gets out of the hall on average, using our 2018 figures. The intent is if you have 4 on, they're going to be getting out of the door in 2 minutes, because they have a minute to listen to the call, get to their gear, get changed, find out where they're going, get onto the truck and get on the road. That's our national standard, which, as per the budget backgrounder, sort of really relates to NFPA 1720. However, that does not have the force of law in the province of Ontario. It's up to each municipality to set its own level of fire protection. However, it is the industry best standard, and it is the one that the lawyers for the people suing us will be using as a background document.
Councillor Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Through you to Chief Gavay. Probationary firefighters at the station, I just need you to kind of walk me through this a little bit. A call comes in, maybe it's a shed on fire, and he's going to jump in the truck and drive there. Is that fair?
Chief, I'll let you go ahead with the dialogue back and forth in this scenario.
Yeah.
Thank you, Worship. So right now, with the one that we do have, he's attached to the day staff. So he will be coming with whichever one of us are there. If you get the second position, I would anticipate that the 2 will be getting out the door in a timely fashion, usually with our 2 fastest volunteers, to ensure the 2-in, 2-out rule, which you don't necessarily need to have for a shed unless there's somebody in there. But basically, our intent is always to try to have at least 4 people on the first due truck.
Okay. I guess I need to clarify myself or go on a little bit longer. Right now, one probationary firefighter, does he take the truck out to wherever the call is? And the volunteers who are now called, do they go to that scene with their equipment, or do they still have to report to the fire hall, get dressed, and then head out?
Thank you. So in answer to that question, basically the way the department has been set up this many years is that the firefighters go to the station, get their protective equipment, get on the truck, and then respond, or whichever truck is left, depending on whether the truck's already left, the first one.
Thank you. Follow up. I guess my next question would then be, the initial probationary firefighter used the term 2 in, 2 out. When he arrives on scene by himself, is he in a position to do anything, or is there kind of a protocol for safety that he waits until another firefighter's on scene before he engages anything?
Well, it would be unlikely that the one that we already have goes by himself in a fire truck to a structure fire, even with the existing day staff. You know, if we're all at work, then we all get on the truck and then leave. However, basically, until you have the 4-person engine company, that truck's not going to leave until you get for a structure fire as a rule, until enough people get on the truck. So right now, that involves hiring an additional probationary firefighter, because we didn't want to shock you with asking for 4 in 1 year. If you refer to the program change, basically, we're realistic. We don't expect council to approve hiring 3 firefighters on top of the one we already have to make that 4. But the intent was to gradually introduce the cost to the taxpayer rather than expecting them to do it all in 1 year. So the intent was another one now, that will get to 2, and then go into a structure fire. The first 2 volunteers into the hall are getting on the truck, and all 4 of them are leaving. And 2020, you don't have to wait for the volunteers for the first 2 truck, because they'll all be going out on the first truck, and the volunteers will be coming out in the other ones that are attached to that station.
Thank you.
Any further questions or discussions about this matter? Before we finish in fire, I'd like to rewind back to the previous one, the volunteer training. You look at the 154,000, which, as you say, you distributed an Excel schedule with that build-up late this afternoon. Not all of us have had an opportunity to review that. If we were to cut that item in half and make it $75,000, what would that look like in the extra training?
In a nutshell, basically I would say that the majority of the specialized courses, so you know, the supervisory level courses, the specialized driver operator, the hazmat operations course, that would all go out of the window, and you pretty much just be looking at live fire and the regular yearly station training.
But to clarify, this is all incremental over and above the minimum training that they receive. This is optional at this point in time, given what the province has come out with. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And whilst I certainly recognize the fact that, you know, council obviously has a difficult time deciding how it's going to spend or not spend as it wishes any of the requested program change money on, I think one of the risks that we take is we have some very keen members who want to get better and add to their toolbox of knowledge. And my fear is if we do take that specialist course money away, we're probably going to demotivate them quite substantially. However, that may not necessarily be a factor that weighs enough for you to fund it at 100%.
Okay, so Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. Just in respect to that, just a comment I'd like to make is the volunteer firefighters, they do a heck of a lot for this town, and at the end of the day, they're saving us quite a substantial amount of money had we had professional firefighters manning the fire halls. So I think at some point in time, you have to look at the people who are doing the work for you and provide them with some level or some opportunity to make it kind of worth their while if they do want to enhance their skills. I don't think it's an unreasonable cost for the township to bear in relationship to keeping them motivated and keeping them on staff. Just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. Any other comments or questions before we move away from fire on to the next? Yes, we're going to take a 5-minute break at this point. Thank you. resume, please? All right, Director Schmidt, we're resuming, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe the final, sorry, just to clarify, so we have two more program changes on the list here. The committee coordinator and the invasive species coordinator. The committee coordinator, the clerk will discuss that in a minute. As for the invasive species coordinator, that was addressed at the January 16th meeting, budget deliberation meeting, whereby a recommendation was approved by council for that to be considered on February 20th as part of the final budget. So that item we're not planning on addressing this evening.
Okay,
I'll pass things
thank
over
you.
to the clerk.
Clerk Chaperon, please.
Thank you. Through you to council. The clerk's department is requesting the addition of one staff complement to create the position of a council/committee coordinator. This is due to the increase in the amount of, in the number of committees, and also to integrate the responsibility of all committees back to the clerk's department. Committee review took place in the summer and fall of 2018 and has just been wrapped up in the last couple of council meetings. So this resulted in the creation of new committees and the revitalization of dormant committees as well. Now, council has finalized the establishment of 10 committees. Of these, 8 will require secretarial services through the clerk's department, 7 of which are proposed to be administered by this new position. So those committees are the Agricultural Advisory Committee, which is proposed to meet a minimum of 3 times per year. The Economic Development Advisory Committee, which is proposed to meet a minimum of 4 times per year. The Cultural Activities Advisory Committee, proposed to meet 3 times per year. Finance and Audit Committee, proposed to meet 2 times per year. The Grants Advisory Committee, which is proposed to meet 3 times per year, dependent on the applications received. Planning and Development Advisory Committee, proposed to meet 3 times per year, and the Recreational Advisory Committee, which meets 10 times per year. So the Deputy Clerk will continue with her role with the Heritage Committee, which meets a minimum of 6 times per year, and the Joint Accessibility Advisory Committee. And I will continue with my role of managing council meetings, regular and special meetings, as well as the Compliance Audit Committee. So the above committees amount to a minimum of 34 meetings per year. When you include regular council meetings, this would bring the total meetings to 60 per year. This number does not include special meetings of council, just regular meetings. So in addition to attendance at meetings, there are additional administrative functions required to support a committee. Those include the creation of the agenda, coordination of all agenda items and reports, creation of the minutes, following up on all outstanding action items that come out of meetings, and coordinating any relevant recommendations with myself for council consideration. And these functions can take a considerable amount of time above and beyond what might be spent at a committee meeting or a council meeting. So other duties of this proposed position would be attending all regular meetings of council, assisting with records management and corporate filing, website management for information pertaining to the clerk's department, would be involved with elections when the time comes around, and various research and clerical functions within the department. The position would not have traditional daytime hours, but instead would be scheduled to accommodate the night meetings, alleviating the necessity to accumulate lieu time or overtime. So if they had meetings every 3rd Wednesday of the month, that day they might come in at noon or 11 o'clock versus 8:30 a.m. to accommodate for the later end time to their shift. So it's really important that all committee agendas and minutes are created consistently to ensure that provincial legislation and the township's procedure bylaw are being adhered to ensure that the mandate of the committees are being followed, and to ensure that council is provided with committee recommendations for approval in a consistent manner. And with that said, I'm happy to answer any questions council may have.
Thank you, Clerk Chaperon, and I open it up to discussions, questions. Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. The outline of the additional meetings, is there an opportunity to understand what the overtime cost would be accrued, or how this could be put out to the rest of staff, or if there's an opportunity for another? I'm having a difficult time with this position being added, as I know that there's a couple more committees that we have, but we've also removed a couple committees, and I understand the legislation is having something to, adding to it as well. I'm just curious what other avenues or what other solutions were looked at before this was proposed.
Clerk Chaperon?
Thank you. So when this proposal was made, at the time, council had created an additional 13 committees, so it has been reduced since then. What staff have done in the meanwhile, in the event that this position is not approved, within the clerk's department, we have already predetermined which committees each staff member may be responsible for. I believe it's very important that the clerk's department do have a role in all of the committees. We're the ones that are properly trained in creation of agendas, minutes, legislation, and the procedure bylaw. So I do feel very strongly that the clerk's department needs to be involved. But if the position is not approved, then the clerk staff will be dealing with that throughout our current complement. As far as what the exact impact is, we're not sure yet, because some of the committees we're not sure if they will have daytime or nighttime meetings. So that really depends once we have our first meetings to see the composition, the members that are on the committee, what their availability is, and how the committee actually progresses.
Any follow-on? Councillor Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Allen, to Clerk Chaperon. Having heard what I just heard, is there any point or contingency in maybe looking at revamping this particular program change that if it is in fact required, that maybe a possibility to change from permanent full-time to maybe a part-time position?
Clerk Chaperon?
Yes, that can definitely be explored.
You cited the committees that were added, and I just jotted down ones that previously had agendas and minutes done, and I believe that's Economic Development, Finance and Audit, and RAC. So can you tell us which committees are in fact incremental to what was previously being handled by the Clerk's Department?
Thank you. Out of those committees, the only committee that the Clerk's Department had administrative duties with would be the Economic Development Advisory Committee. There was a small portion of time where the Clerk's Department was involved with the Finance and Audit Committee, but generally that task was within the Finance Department. Recreation Advisory Committee was administered and currently is administered by Director Belcourt.
So some of these, okay, so Finance and Audit was administered by somebody from the Finance Department, and that still resulted in agendas, minutes, and things flowing adequately. And did the same happen with respect to Director Belcourt's RAC committee meetings as well? I'm just, like, did the old system not work, and that's why you want to have it all under the Clerk's Department now? Or maybe you could explain, please.
Thank you. So having different departments responsible for agendas and minutes, we found did not work. There were instances where some information might not have been flowing through to council, just because of the way the minutes and the agendas had been created. Some of the committees weren't being put on iCompass on our meeting management software. So there are a few anomalies that bringing it into the Clerk's Department and having trained staff conduct these tasks would alleviate.
Other questions, points of discussion? Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, through to Clerk Chaperon. So this person would go to each of these committees plus council committees?
Clerk Chaperon?
Yes, it would be proposed that they would be in attendance at regular meetings of council.
When you say, so what would be the necessity, why is it necessary for them to come to regular meetings of council when they're focusing on the committee activity, as I see?
The reason for bringing somebody into the regular meetings of council would actually be to help out my position here. Then I would be able to focus on procedural matters and whatnot, and not have to worry about the small, minute things like recording recesses and movers and seconders. It would alleviate myself to provide full procedural help throughout meetings.
So who would sit here beside me, you or this other person?
I haven't gone that far yet to to look at that detail.
Yes, CEO Brindley.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, what you'd see is that desk come back over here, and that person would operate out of the desk that is usually over there.
Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry I have to ask the question, Madam Clerk. You were saying about recording the seconders and so on. Do you not pick that up from the recordings of the council meetings to save you having to worry about it during the meetings?
Clerk Chaperon.
Thank you. I try not to do that because it does take a lot of time to go back and watch the feed bit by bit. We try to record as much as we can at the meeting. That's what the intent is of providing a recording services.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, to Clerk Chaperone. My question is, how did you come up with the pay rate? Was it with the other common municipalities? Is that the same pay rate?
Clerk Chaperon.
Thank you. In consultation with the HR coordinator, who is responsible for, I'm not too sure on the exact wording, if I can
CEO
ask to
Brindley.
CEO Brindley.
Thank you, through the mayor to Councillor Chapman. We actually have a grading system for positions. So based on the responsibilities of that position, it falls within a certain grade. And then a salary is then attached to that grade. So when we looked at that position, we looked at what its comparable was, what its points were, I apologize, what the points were. And then that relates to an actual wage. Yep.
Any other discussion points or questions with respect to this? Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and through you to Clerk Chaperone. Is there an opportunity then for, at a subsequent meeting, a budget meeting, to have a plan B as to how this works? I myself am not in support of this position. I do believe that there has to be another opportunity. I mean, we are experiencing a bit of a growth, for sure, so there's more that's brought into the clerk's department, but I do believe that there has to be an opportunity for us to figure out how to meet these needs of the different legislation and all the committees of council, whether it means we as council take a look at the committees that we do and what benefit they provide to council, because if it's at a cost of $56,000, I would argue that some members of our community may not feel that there are some committees that provide that value. So I think that we as a team need to come up with a solution, but this one that's in front of me is not one that I can support.
Clerk Chaperon.
Thank you. Yes, I can bring forward further information to the February 4th meeting. So if council would like, they could defer, or we could not put this motion on the table throughout this meeting and deal with it at the next meeting, the next budget meeting on February 4th.
Okay, thank you. And yes, Councillor Cabral.
Just to provide, through Mayor Allen to Clerk Chaperon, just to provide myself with some context, I'm just wondering, what was the makeup of the clerk's department, say, 4 years ago, the beginning of the last council?
Clerk Chaperon.
Thank you. Through you. The makeup of the clerk's department at the commencement of the 2014 term of council was a little different. It was the corporate services department, but just in clerk staff, there was a clerk, deputy clerk, and a clerk's assistant. Thank you. At this time, those three positions are still in existence. For 2017, the Clerk's Department did receive a contracted employee who was with us for a majority of 2017 and all of 2018. That position is no longer in existence and hasn't been since the end of 2018.
And maybe you'd review the different responsibility of the clerk's department now versus the 214 as far as the corporate services moving, or?
Okay, the change for corporate services happened midway through the 2014 to 18 term. Previously, it included IT services, bylaw enforcement, and communications, and now those three departments have been dispersed under various umbrellas. So administration has taken on IT services and communications, and bylaw enforcement is now amalgamated with planning services.
Any further questions or discussions at this time? Okay, so turn it back to Director Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, before we get into reviewing the actual recommendations that are on the agenda, I wanted to address one of your questions that you had from the beginning of today's session, if you will, as it relates to this slide here. I believe you had asked what the comparison was for 2018. So for 2018, if we look at the township's portion, the increase for 2018 was about $43.22 for an increase of 2.99%. On the county's portion, it was $12.94 for a 1.04% increase. Bottom line essentially was a $68 increase or a 1.86 blended versus what you see on this slide here. So just to repeat that, the 5.3% township portion.
Sorry, just to repeat that, the township portion of 5.3% a year ago in the budget for 18 was what?
2.99.
2.99. The county, instead of 2, was 1.04?
Correct.
And the bottom line, 3.11 was?
1.86.
1.86. Okay, thank you for that information. Robert, or CAO Brindley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to sort of, as we bring this to a close in terms of the staffing, we do consider this seriously. We don't like to come to council all the time looking for staff, and I think if you've looked over the last number of years, we usually don't see a lot of staffing. You usually see other costs that we're looking at. The challenge is also is that we can't staff incrementally. So example, every year Parks Department responsibilities increase or Public Works increases, but we can't hire a quarter person or a third of a person. What happens is we usually go through a stretch of time where we end up getting to a break point. And that's where, in this case, I think you see a few areas where we've received break points where we're not keeping up with things anymore, and then we need to look at staffing. So we do look at it seriously. We don't like to come to council with requests for staff, but I just want you to realize that, unfortunately, we can't staff incrementally because we do 3 more roads this year and 2 new parks this year. We just can't hire quarters of a people. We get to a point where we have to, unfortunately, hire a lot of people. And just for our recreation department, I'll give you some context. Across the road, the City of Barrie facility actually hires more staff at that facility across the road than our entire recreation department. So I just wanted to give you some context that they actually hire more people across the road to maintain that facility than we hire in our entire rec department. So just provide some context.
Thank you, CAO Brindley. Director Schmidt, do you want to add anything before we move to the next step?
No, I think, Mr. Mayor, I think at this time there's a number of recommendations here as per the agenda, item 6.3, that council's been asked to consider for this evening as it relates to the program changes and or new initiatives.
Thank you, Director Schmidt. So these are going to come forward not in the order that they are there, the agenda, but in the order that they were at the previous table and that we discussed them. So we're going to start with the mechanic one. So I need a mover and a seconder that the program change mechanic be included for consideration in the final draft of the 2019 budget, or if anybody wants to make an amendment to that, then they can propose that. So do I have a mover and a seconder? Deputy Mayor Coughlin and Councillor Cabral. Any discussions or Further questions with respect to that? All right, we will vote for that. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Yes, Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Mayor Allen. I'm just curious if I can borrow that last resolution for the wording of this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, next is the Asset Management Coordinator. Can I have a mover and a seconder? And the motion reads that the Program Change Asset Manager Coordinator be included for consideration in the final draft of the 2019 budget. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Ritchie and Councillor Chapman, thank you. Any questions or discussions about this? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried? And can I take a pause here for a second, just clarify with Director Schmidt. We're voting on these, meaning that they're going to be included in, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be another look at the revised budget with these in it for us to vote on the total budget. Is that correct, or is this casting this particular program in stone at this point in time?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to members of council. So the way that the recommendations are structured here is that essentially by approving them, those program changes will be included in the final budget that's presented on February 20th to council. And if council so chooses to make amendments at that meeting, they can do so. But what we'll be presenting on February 20th will include the program changes that are approved essentially tonight. Approved in the sense of being moved to the final draft budget. If those that do not get approved, they will be eliminated, and we won't be bringing those forward any further.
So we don't have to worry about going out and hiring between now and the 20th of February. Thank you. Next is the snow removal township facilities. Can I have a mover and a seconder that the program change snow removal township facilities be included for consideration in the final draft of the 2019 budget? Councillor Moore and Councillor Chapman. Thank you. Any questions or discussions? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next is the program change facility staffing requirements be included for consideration in the final draft of the 2019 budget. Mover and seconder, please. Deputy Mayor Coughlin, Councillor Ritchie. Any questions or discussions about that? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next is the program change increase in volunteer firefighters' hours be included for consideration in the final draft of the 2019 budget. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Cabral and Deputy Mayor Coughlin. Questions, discussions on that? Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Marilyn. Just clarification. It sounded like you said hours, but isn't it training? This is the training, correct?
Yeah, this is the increase in the volunteer firefighters' hours that are going to be used for training. Any, Councillor Hanna?
Thank you, and I thought there was some great discussions on it, and I like what the chief had to say, but I'm sorry, I just have concerns about approving something that we're not mandated to do yet by this province, because we don't know what's going to happen every day with our current leaders in this province, to be frank. I'm not sure whether we should ask to defer this or we need further discussion on it, but I'm not comfortable approving all the hours that have been asked for.
So, thank you, Councillor. So if we looked at deferring it, what would we be looking at deferring it to or until, or on the, deferring it for what? Maybe somebody could give me some indication on this. Director Schmidt or CAO Brinley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Three members of council. Obviously, we're in council's hands as to what you'd like to do with this. If it was deferred, I guess, is there something further that council would like staff to provide in order to have it considered at maybe the February 4th meeting? I guess that's where my head would be. Is there additional information that council requires in order to make a decision on this?
I might add that there was a lot of information going back and forth between managers and council, answering questions, including up till later today, which is good, all very healthy. Maybe we should be able to have a chance to review that. The Chief Gavay was sending some Excel schedules, and there was information on it that I just glanced at, and maybe not all the councillors have seen yet. It makes sense to maybe study those, ask some questions related to those. So I personally would be in favor of deferring this particular item until the next budget date. Councillor Hannah?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'm thinking deferring it until we had a direction from the province, and then if we had to do this, would it be appropriate to defer it, get direction from the province? If it happens, then we pay for it out of reserves. Is that an option, or am I blowing smoke here?
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hannah. So I guess there's a couple things. Is yes, you could defer it, as you mentioned, essentially deferring it in the sense of not approving dollars for it, is I guess where I'm going with this. And so if, subject to any changes in legislation throughout the year, if it's determined that it's approved and dollars are required, then staff would have to come back with a request to council, and likely we'll have to find money possibly out of our tax rate stabilization reserve or any other reserve that we may have some funds set aside. The only other option, I guess, would be is to defer it, but defer it in the sense of don't allow, I think it's similar to Deputy Mayor Coughlin's comments before about the probationary firefighter, is potentially approving the allocation of the dollars, but deferring the actual recruitment or the spending of the dollars until subsequent information is provided to council. So maybe two different options there, maybe, if I explain myself correctly.
Councillor Cabral?
Through you, Mayor, comment. I'm kind of thinking that, the province may mandate certain levels of expertise in certain areas, but I'm kind of wondering to myself out loud here that setting the standard or setting the bar, I don't see where it would fault Springwater Township to supersede it in some cases by providing an opportunity for our volunteer firefighters to progress further than what they actually have to have, and maybe have an opportunity when they submit their paperwork to see if it's a course that we do want to send them on, and let it go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe CEO Brindley, you wanted to make a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is actually a third option on the discussion through Councillor Hannah, is that ultimately, if it's council's choice, they could arbitrarily just say a number. So it's not necessarily about a deferral position, but they could also say, this is the number. But I do like sort of what I'm hearing is that we can defer this item so that council can review the material in full, because there has been a number of emails back and forth between staff and council on a number of these issues. And then we can bring this back at the next meeting and then have that discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Moore.
Through you, Mayor Allen, to probably CAO Brindley. I worked out that it was about $1,711 per volunteer firefighter request for the $150,000. So $1,700 per year is a lot on education. Granted, I know it's specialized. But I like the idea of maybe reducing that by half and still offering some education, maybe not all the wish list, but some. And I don't think that the firefighters would be disgruntled with that. I'm hoping that they would be satisfied. Given the climate that our province is in right now, I think that's probably prudent. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Coughlin, did you still want to make a comment?
My comment would be that I would support a deferral requiring no additional information from staff to allow us the time to process that. If the way that it was presented to us, and I agree with Councillor Cabral, that if this is what's going to take us there, and that's what it is, I do support the training portion. So if there is an amendment to it, that's not a problem. I just won't be bringing that forward myself.
Okay, Councillor Hannah, I have a draft motion here that the motion now before council be deferred to the February 4th, 2019 budget session. Is that something that you would be agreeable to?
I'm not sure if that's the date, but yes, that would be my recommendation.
Okay, moved by Councillor Hannah. Do I have a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Coughlin. Any discussion or questions about that? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Next is the probationary firefighter change, and that is that the program change probationary firefighter be included for consideration in the final draft of the 2019 budget. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor Coughlin,
I would like to amend the motion.
Clerk Chaperon.
Thank you. The motion needs to be moved and seconded before an amendment can be tabled.
Okay, a mover, Councillor Moore and Councillor Chapman, thank you. Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Marilyn, and through you to Clerk Chaperon, do I need a seconder before? But nobody knows what it is, so.
Clerk Chaperon.
Thank you, through you. Yes, you may read your amendment, and then the mayor may ask for a seconder.
Thank you. So the amendment reads that the probationary firefighter position be included for consideration in the final 2019 budget, and that the initiation of the recruitment and hiring for this position commence after an information session pertaining to the long-term composition of the Springwater Fire Services and public consultation takes place, and that the probationary firefighter position requires subsequent vote of council.
So before we look for a seconder, can you explain what you're trying to accomplish by that, please? And elaborate a little bit, please.
Thank you, Mayor Allen. The purpose of this is so that the allocations of funds is there if should council and fire choose to move to this direction in the 2019 year. This will provide an information session to all of council about what the long-term composition is, where we see ourselves going. And the reason I feel that I need that is in my time here, there's been 4 fire chiefs, I believe, and different visions and different direction. And while we do have a fire master plan, it has changed drastically. So I would like to have that brought forward for this entire council so that we can all have a plan of where we're going and what it looks like and what the steps are along the way and what the budget implications are going to be along the way. Also, public consultation, I left that vague so that we can decide what it actually means and how to best get that. And that a subsequent vote of council, just so that it is a decision of council at that time.
But this is definitely earmarking the money for a probationary officer in the budget, subject to it being ratified on the next, along with the others in the next meeting. Any questions? Councillor Hannah.
Thank you. Just for clarification, we're talking about a full-time fire position, not a probationary, but a full-time fire position, correct?
Deputy Mayor Coughlin.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, and I will defer to Chief Gavay, but from what I understand, the probationary firefighter position is a full-time firefighter position, much like the one that we have just hired in 2018. This would be the second in the composition.
Chief Gavay.
Thank you, Worship. Deputy Mayor Coughlin's exactly correct.
Further discussions or questions with respect to this motion? We need a seconder. Councillor Hannah? Councillor Ritchie? Oh, okay, that's a vote. So no further discussion about this. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried, thank you. Now we're voting on the main motion as amended, and that's still, we have a mover and a seconder, that the program change probationary firefighter position be included for consideration in the final 2019 budget, and that the initiation of recruitment hiring for this person commence after an information session pertaining to the long-term composition of Springwater Fire Services, and public consultation takes place, and that the probationary firefighter position require a subsequent vote of council. Talk about my writing. Any questions or discussions? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Thank you. Next, the committee coordinator change. I need a mover and a seconder that the program change committee coordinator be included for consideration in the final draft of the 2019 budget. Moved by Deputy Mayor Coughlin, seconded by Councillor Chapman. Any discussions, questions? Deputy Mayor Coughlin?
Thank you, Marilyn, and through you to Clerk Chaperone. As I don't believe the direction of this is changing, however, I would like to refer this to the next session of budget with an option or something not of $56,000 to be included. I feel if we were to defer it, we would just be having the same conversation over again. So if there can be an opportunity to have, I guess, a different plan put in place for council's consideration, that would be great.
Okay, Councillor Chaperon is just scribing here, so we'll give her a second. Thank you. I meant Clerk Chaperon. Beg your pardon. I don't repeat it a dozen times. The amended motion reads that the motion now before council be referred to the February 4th, 2019 budget session, and that staff provide further options regarding this request. I've got a mover, Deputy Mayor Coughlin, and a seconder, please. Councillor Cabral. Any questions or discussions about this? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay. All right, I think this is a good time to break because we move into capital items next. That's substantial, so we'll save that for the next budget session, which is next Monday. Correct, Director Schmidt?
Correct, Mr. Mayor.
And we've got a lot accomplished tonight, and I need a mover and a seconder to recess at 6:01 p.m. Deputy Mayor Coughlin, Councillor Ritchie. The council hereby recess at 6:01 p.m. on January 30, 2019 to reconvene on 3 p.m. on February 4th, 2019. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Director Schmidt, and all of the directors and chiefs and other fire staff. Thank you, council.